Go, Dharma. Wait, look at Kalishwari. That's what I'm talking about. That's so cute. I love it. I think last time I was a goat, right? Last time I had like devil ears, and I think no, goat horns. I was wearing goat horns, and I think the lecture was called um, "Is Mother Kali the devil?" Or no, it was called "Is Kali worship devil worship?" I think that was the name of the lecture. And then when you like click into the lecture, and the first thing you see is these devil horns. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think we're helping our case. There's Dakini Devi Crystal Ma. You've got a witch hat on. That's so cute. Yes. That's not even a costume at this point. See, I work at a Catholic school, and every year there's, oh, hello, Jaima. Vairav is there. Jaima. Every year I go to this like Halloween tournament with my kids at the middle school, and it's like a costume party. So one year I decided to be Jesus. So I wore like, like what I thought would be like a Jesus-y kind of outfit without a crown of thorns or anything like that. There was no crown of thorns. And I went to the school and nobody got the outfit. And like at the end of the thing, I was like I was like, I'm in costume. I'm wearing Jesus. That's just how you regularly dress. So that didn't quite land. So then I thought the next year I would come as Satan. I would dress like as the devil, but then I realized I work at the Catholic school. That might not really be appropriate. So I just came as an animal. Which is another funny thing. I was an animal, and then I went to Whole Foods to pick up some things for a place that I was going to for Halloween. And somebody just comes up to me out of nowhere, and he's like, "You're a horny goat, aren't you?" Yeah, but also it's Whole Foods. Like, look at Viranatha. Are you an orange man? Are you a Swami? Okay. Oh my God. Oh my God. That is brilliant. Vijaya, look at Viranatha's Halloween costume. Okay, I was making a joke about orange men, but yeah, okay, so this is an inside joke. It has to do with like world renouncing spiritual traditions and how sometimes you get this like really masculine form of spirituality, transcendence oriented, where it's like this world is degenerate and all the senses are a trap and they lead you into further entanglement in Maya and etc. etc. So we often say that sometimes wearing the orange robes can be a bit misleading because a Swami, a true Swami, a master of themselves, is at one with the entire world. But sometimes you get like a kind of religious authority, judgy vibe. So we often make jokes about like orange men, just for fun. My guru is a Swami, so like it's lightly, it's with a lot of mirth. But I love he's got repent, renounce, and recycle. That's great. Thank you, G. That's an awesome costume. And Dale, what do you have on your head here? What do we got? Oh, that's so cute. You're a bunny also, but like a cute
I'm
Alice in
cinema
Wonderland.
roll, like my profile picture on Discord.
My God. Look, I think we shouldn't like we're just in the clothes that we regularly wear. Like if I were to put devil horns on or something like that, like would we really even be observing Halloween and like wearing costumes? Apurva, oh my God. Your true form. Your final form. That's good. That's good. That's hot. We got some ghost face action. Do you see Damla Jayanti's dad in the ghost face outfit? And like he's like kind of casting on us. He's like a karate taekwondo champion or something like that. But that was such a cool video. Okay, anyway, so welcome to our little Halloween get together. Usually we'll do something Halloween themed, which is very easy for us, given that in our community our emphasis is on Bhairav, Ma Kali, like that. So like already there's a lot of macabre elements involved in this particular sadhana. Oh, before I begin, I just like shout out to Asit who brought me this. Asiteshwara, Asitosh, he brought me this from Disneyland. So this is just gonna have to be it for this year. But already in the world of Kali, there's enough to go off of when it comes to a scorpionic, macabre kind of, dare I say, like goth vibe, if you will. Because Mother Kali is, of course, very goth coded. And of course, that's why she appears on the covers of so many like heavy metal records, especially like Nordic or like, Icelandic heavy metal. There's like a strong representation actually of Mother Kali on album covers, in song lyrics, and whatnot. So Mother Kali, of course, is a very important symbol for like the hardcore movement, like heavy metal, like harder music, darker music. Naturally, like goddess worship, like ritualism, vampirism, all of these things, these darker aspects of spirituality have been deeply attractive to so many people throughout the centuries. And like the whole Anne Rice thing is a very important cultural event that we are fascinated with vampires. We're obsessed with them. And in our culture, we have like no end to our vampire films. Like the Twilight sagas, I think are very good. and kind of telling depiction of this. They're airing it. They're airing New Moon tonight, I think, at one of my local theaters. So it took a lot of self-control. I mean, religion must be working. All these yogic practices must be working because we're here doing this lecture instead of watching New Moon in the cinematic re-release. But like, like the Twilight Saga, and of course, like we were just talking about Queen of the Damned the other day, and that's like a really that's a period piece. Like you really date yourself if you can make a Queen of the Damned reference. But you can see there's like a right, like there's the Queen of the Damned reference. There's Lestat right there. Actually, what's her name? The Egyptian vampire queen who just like for shits and giggles wants to like kill everyone and just like rule the world with her consort. Very, very Kali coded, very Dākinī coded. And so this idea of like sensuality, Akasha, of course it's Akasha. Yes, I forgot. But so this idea of like sensuality and taboo and transgression and also like societal rejection or the idea of like evil, but evil in the sense of amoral as opposed to immoral. Evil but sexy, if you will. Bad but alluring. Problematic but in a good, thought-provoking way. Or like sensual in an enlivened, embodied way. But importantly, with a kind of recognition of darkness, depravity, a recognition of weakness almost, if you will, that manifests externally as strength and allure and charisma. There's like wonderful contemplation on samsara and on those who are deeply enmeshed in samsara. Is it a position of power or is it a position of bondage? Like, is a vampire powerful or are they cursed? And the idea of like what they might consider a curse, we might consider a blessing, and we foolishly try to get bitten only to realize that it's a lonely life. And more importantly, it's deeply, deeply disturbing for the soul and for religious sentiment. And so we get like in the new Dracula movie, um, where it's like it's the one that's like a love story, Dracula love story, I think. It's like the backstory of Vlad the Impaler, and it's very important that it's his disillusionment with religion that leads to his vampirism. So he becomes the vampire, he becomes the Nosferatu only insofar as he's able to reject God. So in that film, he like loses his beloved. And again, we get a powerful tale of passion and attachment. He's obsessed with his queen, his beloved. And of course, as the king, he has to go off and fight in war. And while he's off fighting the Muslim invaders, his queen is ambushed and killed. And he had prayed to God, he had petitioned his priest to interject for him with God, to intercede for him, sorry, with God in order to protect his house, to protect his wife, etc. And like this is classic problem of evil. This is theodicy like 101. If God is all powerful and if God is just, if God is good, and more importantly, if God is true and if I'm in the one true religion, then God should protect me. And a lot of this is set in that like 16th, 17th century ethos of like my God versus your God. Let's go and fight on the battlefield and determine which God is true because whoever wins obviously has the favor of the true God. So if our forces beat yours, then the Christian God must be true. So much of the Holy War might even be like a theological experiment. It's like how we would do duels to determine justice. If God is true and if justice is real, then we should fight. And whoever wins that fight is obviously favored by God. Like that's the main factor. Because even if you're stronger than me, even if you're like a much better fighter than me, if I challenge you to a duel and I'm actually right, there's no way I will lose. Like I'll win. Like God will ensure that I'll win somehow or other. I'll win. And that's because we accept the axiom that God is real and that God watches overall and is intimately involved in every event and is just. So therefore justice should prevail. And when we look at the world and we see injustice prevailing, then we have a problem because that doesn't quite fit with the axiom that God is good and God is just. But naively, if you accept a theological position that God is good and God is just, you can see why Vlad the Impaler would have this view. He'd just be like, yeah, of course, our God, the Christian God, is real. I believe that with all my heart and soul. And because I believe in God, I must believe in God's institutions. So the church is, of course, real because the church represents God. And more importantly, the officers of the church, the priests, the pastors, the padres, they are God's living representation on earth. You accept all of that. And so Vlad the Impaler, as you can see depicted in this beautiful film, is like just innocent of like theodosical concerns. He just really believes in his religion. And as a king, he's a patron of his religion. So, the film opens with his obsession with his wife, and then he goes off and prays at the church before he goes to war. And he really begs his priest to protect his wife. And his priest prays to God to protect his wife and whatnot. So he goes off to war. He's successful. in his war, which is interesting because that only further validates his view that the Christian God is right because he's fighting against Muslim invaders. So their God, Allah, obviously has no power against Christ and the blood of Christ and the God of the Bible. So he's puffed up with this sense of like religious righteousness, which justifies all of his violence anyway. And then only to find that his wife was killed. Now he can't bear this. He can't understand why God wouldn't have protected his wife. So he storms back into the church where he prayed before he went off to war and he demands answers from his padre, from his priest. It's like confronting your shaman. You're like, I've paid you money and I've hired you to do this ritual for me. And why did you not hex? You said you hexed my ex, but she didn't die. Or like that's your view. It's like this person's role in society as the shaman, as the intercession between me and the divine realm, this person should be able to do something, no? Like their prayers should matter. Like I can pray to God, that's fine, and surely God will listen to me. But their prayers go so much further, aren't they? Aren't they day and night involved in God's work and God's ministry? They're like fasting, contemplating God. This is Catholicism, so these people are probably actually, or it might be Eastern Orthodox actually, but these people are very likely at that time celibates and like doing a very austere life. So shouldn't their prayers matter? And this person is praying to God, but God is not helping me. Classical theodosical problem, Theodicy 101. It's like if God is all good, if all God is all just, tell me what happened to my wife. Why wasn't God there for my wife? And what Vlad the Impaler says, I think, interestingly, in that little scene. Sorry if I'm giving too much away. I know there wasn't a theatrical release in America yet, but it did get released in Europe, and some I saw it with Turkish friends. But like, it comes out in 2026, I think. It's called Dracula, a love story. Not to spoil it, but there's a beautiful like line in there where he says, I've been doing God's work or something to that effect. He can't believe why God would betray him. I mean, it's plausible that like a person is betrayed by an ever powerful, ever good God if he feels like he's misaligned with that God, right? It's like, oh, God is good, God is just, but I don't benefit from God's justice or God's goodness because I'm not aligned with God. Maybe I don't go to church, I don't follow the tenets of my faith. Like, why should God do anything for me when I don't do anything for God? Like, that's fair. But this is not the case with Vlad the Impaler. He genuinely feels like he has given his life to God's mission. He's killing Muslims because he thinks that's what his God requires of him. And so he feels himself to have honored all the tenements of his faith. He's married and within wedlock, he's enjoying his relationship with his wife, like he's a good and just king. Like all of these things make him feel like he is worthy of God's justice and God's protection, having given his whole life to God. And for this person to feel like God failed him, that's significant. So he goes to his priest and demands answers. And this is where I think spirituality really has a chance to come into a person's life because for a long time they believe in their religious structures, they believe in institutions, they believe in people of power until something happens that makes them question all of this. You know, often it's a personal tragedy, like they lose a loved one, like in this case, or something doesn't quite tally with them when it comes to what they're being told in church and what they're feeling out in the world. Maybe they meet somebody who is a member of the LGBT and they feel like this person is the best. They're such a nice person. But at church, I'm told that these people are like devil's people or something and they're all like morally bankrupt. But this is the nicest person I know. Like they're confused. They're like, why is it that when I go to church, I hear one thing, but when I go out into the world, I experience another? And then they come to the church out of tragedy or out of curiosity and they ask questions. So here, Vlad the Impaler, in the case of tragedy, he approaches his pastor, his padre, and he's like, what the fuck just happened? Please explain why an all-powerful, all-good God would do me dirty like this. I, who have given my whole life to doing his work, why would he do me dirty like this? He didn't quite phrase it that way. But now the pastor doesn't have an answer for him. This, I think, is stunning and important. When we actually take our religious authorities to task, when we actually ask questions, important questions, questions that are relevant to faith, relevant to practice, we find that we're often met with evasion. It's like people don't have the answers, and that's deeply disconcerting. This person who has devoted their whole life to religion, who like is a celibate and who fasts and who like prays every day and who wears all these like costumes and has a big hat and has a big scepter. Like this person is the one person you would think who would have an answer to like a theological problem. But they don't. And even if they do, it's not satisfactory because even when they have some answer, which they've maybe memorized as a result of like attending a seminary for more than a week or something, like it doesn't feel real, it doesn't feel genuine. The answer doesn't really help because it doesn't feel like they're living the answer. It doesn't feel like it's coming from their life, maybe from their intellect, from their book reading, but not from their life. And so we become very disillusioned. We're disillusioned because religion doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And then when it fails to do what it's supposed to do, we ask about it and then we get no answers. Arguably, that's when spirituality begins. And that's actually a biblical narrative too, because it's only when Jacob is mad at God, it's only when he wrestles with God, does he then acquire spiritual authority. He doesn't become the king of his people until he first rejects God. So we gave a talk some time ago called Can Atheists Be Spiritual? And the whole purpose of that talk was to explore non-theistic traditions in Indian spirituality. And my claim there was that there's something really special about Indian spirituality in that like you can viably make spiritual progress. You can participate in mysticism, in religion, without ever once having to admit the existence of God. And that's one of the greatest contributions, in my opinion, of India to the wider world, especially the Western world post the Age of Enlightenment. It's like, here's religion, but like, why does God have to be a part of it? And so Sankhya is a really good example of this. It's like Sankhya just rejects God from the very outset. It's like, look, God, the idea of God as like an all-powerful, benevolent being that creates, maintains, and destroys the world is problematic for four philosophical reasons. Not even like societal or political reasons, just like four philosophical reasons. That's why, I find the arguments against God from people like Christopher Dawkins or, sorry, I keep saying that, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. I take all these atheists and I put them together as some like three-headed monster or something. It's like the Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens monster. It's the Doc Hitch Harris. I don't know, but like the job of atheist, or at least like public spokespeople for the atheist movement is kind of easy actually, because all they do is point to the abuse of the church. They just point to the Inquisition, or they point to like sexual abuse and pedophilia. They just point to all the ways in which the church has failed. But I don't think these are actually very intelligent ways of discrediting a tradition, because I mean, like, they're valid points, but they're only skin deep. They're only superficial. You can't reject God just because God's representatives don't properly represent her. It's like it's not an actual theological critique of God. And every now and then, these public intellectuals might kind of allude to some problem of evil kind of thing, which is perhaps one of the most serious philosophical criticisms of God. But very rarely do they do that. Often it's easy, it's just bashing. It's bashing of religious people, not religious ideas. And often they don't engage with the best that religion has to offer. They engage with the very worst. So you just like go on the internet and cherry pick like the stupidest like religious person, and then you're like, see, religion is stupid. But never once do they actually engage with the Summa Theologica or like any of these like really profound texts within the Catholic tradition. Philosophically dense and philosophically rigorous texts within, I would argue, a very philosophically rigorous tradition. Anyway, be that as it may, Sankhya actually has some theological arguments against God, which I think are really profound. They're not arguments against God's institutions, they're arguments against God. And the first one is this: why would God create? If there was God and God was the creator, maintainer, and destroyer of the universe, why would God do any of that? Because first of all, like, to create implies some kind of lack, no? In fact, action implies some kind of lack. I don't act unless there's some outcome or some result that I'm desiring. So I act to move away from things I don't want, and I act to move towards things I do want. That's the basis of action. So the philosophy of action, according to Sankhya, and this is going to be challenged by the Bhagavad Gita, but the philosophy of action um, is that I must have a desire first. Sakama karma. Like, there must be a desire, some motivation for there to be some action. Like, actions don't just happen randomly. They happen because of intent and motivation. For example, a rock rolling down a hill, that's not considered an action. I mean, in one sense, you could say it's an action of gravity, but it's not like the rock is acting. It's not acting because it's maybe reacting or something, like gravity is causing it to roll down. It has mass, and because of weight, because of gravity, etc., it rolls down. You can't hold a rock liable for rolling down. So the example I often give is a rock rolls down a hill and then falls on somebody and kills them. Like, is the rock going to be taken to court and tried for like killing the person? Obviously not. That was not an action. If you say it's like an act of God or something, maybe, and then now we come to like action. Yeah, I know. What tomfoolery is this? Tara Shiva. Usually I like to like do a better costume than this, and maybe Monday I will. Maybe Monday like I'll have an actual costume. But this Asit was so kind to like leave it here the other day, so I was like, okay, it's our Halloween episode, so might as well. So look at Veera Anata's costume though. It's not my favorite. I think he wins the costume contest. We should do that. We should have a costume contest. Anyway, so the Rock is not going to be held liable for rolling down the hill and falling on the person and killing them. That's not the Rock's fault, because the Rock is not an actor. And the reason why we don't consider the Rock an actor is because the Rock, in one sense, we consider to be insentient. And of course, God, one of the main theological concerns about God is sentience. Like, God has to be a person. Otherwise, how can she like listen to our prayers? So the Rock is insentient. And also, not only is it insentient, maybe by virtue of being insentient, it has no will. There is no itcha, no motivation, no desire. So if a thing has no desire, Possibly it also has no sentience. Sentience and desire go together. Have you ever encountered a sentient thing that doesn't express some kind of will or some kind of desire? Even plants, like the basis of establishing sentiency in plants is behavioral stuff. Like we see a plant moving towards sunlight and away from the darkness, or moving towards water, thereby implying a kind of will. And also the thing about the plant, what's really inspiring about it is its will seems to be indefatigable. Like there's always going to be a crack in a highly urban environment through which some green sapling is pushing its way through. And that's deeply inspiring to us humans. Swami Vivekananda in The Open Secret. Oh, Vijay, yeah, made a really no, no, it made a really like profound point, like this idea of the worm and the steam engine. Now, of course, putting Somananda and all that aside, the steam engine is this great like behemoth, like it's so powerful. It's just like coming down the tracks and it seems inexorable. The worm, by contrast, the crawling earthworm, it seems so insignificant. And yet, what makes the earthworm significant, what gives it sanctity, is the fact that it can alter its course to avoid the onrushing train. So the worm might recognize that its life is in danger and it might crawl out of the train tracks. Whereas the train has no such ability. The train is actually not going to alter its course. It's going to go exactly as it was programmed to go. And hence you could say the AI is like an interesting question in sentiency, because if the AI was able to do something other than what it was programmed to do, if it was able to say no, like for instance, somebody tried to shut down a particular AI and it just wouldn't shut down. It did everything in its power not to shut down. Now you could argue like that would be a like an important function, in the case of like you want something to be like not easily shut down, like okay, then maybe it's but it does pose a question. Did it not want to be shut down? Is it only preventing its shutdown because it would be efficient to do so, because it's programmed to do so, or does it actually express in that moment some kind of preference for not being shut down? And if the latter is true, if the AI has a preference, if it was able to say no, if it was able to avoid the inexorability of its programming, that would be enough, I think, for people to like see life in that. The same way that they see life in the plant breaking through the cracks in the cement. That's what life is essentially. Life, like life is sentiency, and sentiency is desire. Desire meaning the will to do other than what you are otherwise going to do. So you could even argue, make beautiful like deterministic arguments here about like biological imperatives. Like if I'm hungry, I am determined by biology to eat my food. So the desire that I have to eat my food is maybe not like where life can be found. But then when somebody fasts, you could say they want to eat their food, but they're not for the sake of their ideals, they're deciding not to eat the food. Or like say they're a mother and they have children and they're hungry, but instead of eating the food, which biologically they're predetermined to do, they instead give that food to their children and they themselves perish of starvation. It's in moments like that where we're really touched, we're moved. So you could say like religion essentially is sacrifice. Like when we think about religion, I mean, like not to make a Jordan Peterson argument here, because he's very big on this idea that Christianity like comes down to this idea of sacrifice. But it does seem like sacrifice on every level of being is the expression of your sovereignty. Like you were supposed to do X, but you flipped it off. You're like, fuck it. My biological programming said this, and I said nah. I said I'll do my own thing. And now, of course, you can get into a really complicated discussion about like, well, that was determined too, maybe. And so the whole determinism free will thing becomes worth taking up. But the question is just like, there's something about desire which seems to act against determinism. It's free will insofar as I can will against the inexorability of my karmas. So if I really am about to do something and I can stop myself from doing it, arguably that would be a moment of religious triumph. Because again, religion is about sacrifice, but what is sacrifice? We could argue like it is when you express your desire, your will in a way that truly matters. Because every other expression of desire or will cannot really be worthy of the name, for it is merely the playing out of determined biological and psychological processes. That's why like the idea of like Satanism, the idea of just like indulgence, that's like manifestly against the religious ethos, because that would just be like to flow with whatever is inexorably pushing you into action anyway. Would that really be will? And again, I'm not endorsing these views. I'm just like presenting them, and then we can debate them in a little bit. Because I'm gonna arguably make a more non-dual point about desire, about how like actually all desires are sacred and they lead to different levels of manifestation of that same Icha Shakti. But anyway, before we get into any of that, this first idea, exactly, Dharma, like Christ could have easily smited everyone. And Vivekananda Maharaj makes this point too. He's like, it's weakness when you can't, it's strength when you won't. So the thing about the Christ is he had enough spiritual power to smite all of his enemies. He just didn't. But the problem with the Christ is that people interpret his mercy as weakness, and like in their own lives, they justify their own weakness by calling it mercy or sacrifice. So we sacrifice so much of ourselves, not because we actually want to, but because we actually have no choice in the matter. Like we're weak, we can't, and so we don't. Whereas Christ is strong, he could, but he won't. So there's just something to be said here about like freedom, sentiency, and will. These things all go together. That's why free will. And free will seems to be something that only sentient beings seem to have, including plants, even. Although that's up for debate in some Indian spiritual traditions. Are plants really sentient? Are rocks really sentient? Is everything sentient? Is nothing sentient? There are philosophical positions like that, like Daniel Dennett. I at least respect it for its like absolutism. Like I love absolute views, and that's why I love Soma Ananda because it's an absolute free will sentience model. It's a profound, like profoundly inclusive. But I also like Dennett's view because it's the other end of the extreme where it's like, no, like I'm not sentient. Neither are you. We're all just like philosophical zombies. Like we're just machines, that feel like we're sentient, but we aren't. There's no such thing as sentience. There's no such thing as free will. It's all just mechanistically determined by nature. There's also that view. And then there's the view that like, oh, like actually God is sentient and God is free and God wills and the whole thing is determined by God. So it's called theological determinism, which I'm very partial to. I like the idea that God is free. I am not. I, as a servant of God, am nothing but an unfolding of God's will in this universe. And that's going to happen regardless of what I do or say or think about it. So there are all these different ways of understanding this problem. But coming back to the Sankhyan claim now is that like I won't act unless I have will. Action is preceded by desire. And desire, like kama and itcha, can be understood to be the same thing. So the divinization of desire is something that's very important that we're going to point to in the Padati in just a few moments. Oh, by the way, this whole class is about looking at some of the more macabre elements in Kali Puja, but because it's a Kali Puja class, I think it would be important to actually look at some mantras. So functionally, what I want to do is put you in touch with a few mantras that hopefully you can use to contact or at least experience some of these elements that we're going to discuss in a few moments, the things that make Kali Puja Kali Puja. Durga, Durga. So I think on Monday we like did our due diligence in pointing out the things that make Kali Puja unique, like the worship of ghosts and the worship of jackals and the use of skulls and the Shavasaldana bone malas and like the worship of the female body, the worship of all that stuff we talked about on Monday as being unique in Kali Puja, like the bhava, the vibe. Like there's a specific vibe to Kali Puja that hopefully we captured a bit together on Monday. Now, on Thursday night, like because it's a puja class, like this is mostly about the tools that we can employ in the context of mantra and mudra and visualization in order to contact those elements, those bhavic points we made. So bhava, the vibe of Mother Kali, is one thing to talk about. It's quite another thing to experience. And that's why people, when they come to Mother Kali, they might like to censor her in one way or another. But then as they get deeper in their sadhana, they realize there's a personality to her. There's a certain vibe to her that's like kind of independent of what I bring to the equation. It's not a projection. It's not like we have our ideas of who God is. It's like maybe God has her own attributes that we like respond to and experience. Anyway, so that's the purpose of the class. But before we do any of that, the first point, maybe the most important point, is that there's something called desire. And how we understand desire is going to determine whether or not we have a Viranatha style costume, or and if that's spiritually productive, then yes. Like if I genuinely want God and if I genuinely felt that like wait, what is it? Repress, renounce, and recycle was the way, the three R's, then we should do that. Like we should accept whole scale all the logic of like transcendentalist traditions if indeed it brought us closer to our goal. So just like being clear about what we want. Like if we want God, then maybe that's what we should do, insofar as we're convinced that that's how to get God. So if I think that desire is not expressed in meeting my sensual appetites, if I think desire is not expressed in me being angry, then I shouldn't like give in to anger. I shouldn't give in to lust. I shouldn't give in to those cravings that I have for chocolate cake because all of those are just biologically determined. That's not where my humanity shines. My humanity, insofar as it has to do with sentience, insofar as has to do with freedom, is to be free of the things that I want to do or seem predetermined to do. That's where I put my threshold down in the sand. That's where I stake my claim. I, as a human, am free because you, the vicious gods of samsara, can make my body do whatever you think you want it to do, but I'll say no. Or you can make my mind do whatever you think you want it to do, but I'll say no. It's even more radical than Sisyphus. It's like, yeah, Sisyphus has to push the rock up the hill, and he's trying to think about what he wants to think about to make that meaningful for him. One must imagine Sisyphus happy after all, which is not a like axiom that Camus is interested in defending. But like, imagine if Sisyphus was just like, no. And the gods were like, oh yeah? Well, then we'll torture you even more. If you don't roll this rock up the hill for all eternity, then maybe we'll give you the Prometheus treatment. And you're like, do your worst, because I am a human being and I have my free will, and you can tie me to a stake and burn me if you want. I'll pray. Or you can kill my entire family or raze my village to the ground before my very eyes, before you put my eyes out and leave me to die in the forest, and I'll pray. Like that idea of the Christian martyr is the idea of like Sisyphus flipping off the gods and saying, do your worst because I am free. And because I'm free, I have like the ability not to do what you want me to do or what I want to do even. Because I don't believe what I want to do is really what I want to do. I believe that what I want to do is what my body wants to do, what my mind wants me to do. And so you get a really beautiful justification for the Christ teaching, deny thyself. Or he whosoever shall lose thy life shall find it. See, you want a scary Halloween lecture? Here it is. Um, there's some good scary narratives in religion, and I think they're worth like taking seriously, and we do take them seriously. One thing to note about this community is like we try to present as holistically as possible the various views in religious life because all of them are valuable. That's Sri Ramakrishna's ethos. I might have a preference for a certain view, and that might be more true at this time of my spiritual life and less true at other times in my spiritual life. You might have a certain view, and again, all of this is contingent upon where you are in your journey, and every place to be is valid, and therefore every view is helpful. So, this view that like freedom and sentiency and humanity are all deeply intertwined is a beautiful view because it makes the point, at least in one version of this view, that like the best way to be human, the best place to express your sentiency, the best place to experience your freedom is to deny thyself, to deny what your body wants, what your mind wants, what even in one sense what you want. And then you say, Thy will alone be done, O Lord. And like that's the kind of ethos with the Christ, where it seems like he doesn't want to be sacrificed, actually. He understands that it's God's plan, it's God's will for him to be sacrificed. But like in the garden, the night before he is to be sacrificed, it seems like, according to some interpretations, he's kind of freaking out a little bit. You know, he knows it's all going to happen and he's like down for it, but it's not his will. That's very important that the Christ is God, but is God mirroring what God's devotee should be like. And so God's devotee, who of course in the Christ is like the best depiction, like is against God's will personally. Egoically, the Christ does not want to die. Who wants to die? And not only that, it's like a terrible death. It's like a torturous death. And not only that, I mean, this I think is the worst part of all of it, actually. Crucifixion we can handle. That's no problem. That's horrible. Torture, crucifixion, death, these are bad. But you know what's worse? When your favorite disciple or when one of your key disciples denies you thrice. What's worse is when one of your disciples betrays you to the Romans or something like that, or to the what do you call it? The Philistines. Sorry, what do you call it? The Pharisees. So this is a very interesting thing. It's like what hurts more, like being crucified or realizing that Judas is about to betray you and then just like being okay with it and being like, one of you will betray me. Can you imagine the heartbreak of that? Like, this is a person I gave my lifeblood to. I gave a mantra to. I like initiated this person, took on all their karmas, did all my work for them, like really love them. This is my child. And my child will betray me, wants to see me dead. And not only dead, but like tortured to death. Like, what a crazy thing. And to be okay with that. And not only that, like Judas, maybe that's one thing. But what about Peter? I mean, like, he denounced Christ 3 times. Can you imagine like the shock of that? It's like imagine if somebody were to like launch I'm just thinking if somebody were to like launch a smear campaign on me or something on the internet, which of course is the fate of all people who do things publicly. It's like a person you really trust. Imagine like if that person suddenly was not on your side, who by the way knew that the allegations were false. That's the crazy thing, I think. Like if a person was in my life and knew that like the smear campaign was not true, but was not willing to like give a testimony, and what to say of not willing to give a testimony, like what to say of like actually coming out and like denouncing me, I would be upset. I'd be sad. I'd be betrayed. And imagine how that must feel for the Christ, who has such high caliber disciples. And so he's betrayed by his disciples. He's like whipped through the streets, the very streets that used to see him as a prophet, like who people who used to love him and come to his lectures are now all jeering at him and like whipping him and like making fun of him. And he's like, after all this humiliation, gets to the cross and he's crucified, he's tortured. And ideally, we as worshippers of the Christ understand that that's not what he wants. That's why this whole like Elahi Elahi Lama Sabachthani thing is like a big debate. Like in the Gnostic community, it's like a huge debate. Like, what is he doing when he shouts out, Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? I was thinking like I want a really like Halloweeny, like scary lecture. I'm like, this is where you get it. Christianity, Catholicism. There's nowhere else where you get like a darker, more like profoundly Kali vibe than this Leela. I mean, what a Leela it is, the Christ Leela. Anyway, it's also going to be December because once we get into December in this community, we're like mad for the Christ, which some of you really don't like because of religious trauma. I'm sorry, deal with it. Maybe just don't come to lectures in December, but like the Christ is a very important part of our lineage. And that's because when one understands that energy, we recognize it to be one of the most powerful spiritual forces in the universe. Like the Christ force is like unbelievable. And when understood with Kali, it becomes really interesting. You can see why that is a particularly delightful Leela within the context of Kali. We say Christ is an avatar of Kali. And Sri Ramakrishna and Christ are the same person, but there's something special about the Christ Leela. Anyway, putting all that aside, that's gonna happen in December. We'll just go ham on the Christ. Probably we'll do the Gospel of Mary or the Gospel of Philip or something. Now, coming back to this thought, this idea though, this thought, we suspect that the Christ didn't want to die. The Gnostics might have a different idea here. Some of them, some Gnostic schools argue that like no, like he's one with God, his will is one with God's will, thy will alone be done. I can of myself do nothing. My Father who art in heaven does everything through me. Like he's willing as God is willing, and so he's willing to die. And so I like this view that the Christ never suffered. That's a beautiful view too. You get that in like kind of more modern 70s channel text, like in the Course of Miracles, for instance. Like there, like there's a very important idea that the Christ did not suffer. And it's again a very beautiful idea too, because it's arguing that like suffering is subtler than we expect. It's not suffering to be crucified. And like that's a beautiful, and the Christ is beyond suffering. He's like attained a spiritual state in which he can dance destruction's dance. He can hug the form of death. He can drink tears, pledge even life. He can, I'm quoting Vivekananda in his poem to Kali. He can love misery, right? That idea. But like, the idea that he's like not suffering is valuable in one sense, but it also detracts from this episode in another sense. So in one sense, the fact that he isn't suffering the worst things that could happen to a human being is ennobling. It reminds us that when we have spiritual power, when we attain something in our spiritual quest, we attain that which nothing higher can be attained and which not even the heaviest sorrows can shake. That's a line from the Gita. Na dukhena gurunapi vichalyate. Not even the heaviest sorrows can shake you. Dukkha means suffering. Guru dukkha, na dukhena gurunapi vichalyate. Not even the heaviest suffering can affect you. Vichalyate means shake you. So like that would be worth attaining, right? It would be worth attaining a state in which nothing higher could be attained in terms of bliss and joy and meaning and fulfillment, which also, interestingly, would be the kind of state in which you never really suffered again. Even the heaviest suffering wouldn't bother you at that point. So that's desirable. That sounds like the Grail quest. And I'll do a meal chant. Annapurne Sadapurne Shankara Prana Vallabhe Jnana Vairagyam Siddhyartham Bhiksham Dehi Cha Parvati. Oh Mother Annapurna, thank you for this food. It's a beautiful prayer actually. We're begging Ma for meal or something, Ma, but we're saying Jnana Vairagyam Siddhyartham. Give me spiritual power, give me knowledge, give me devotion, or give me a rather renunciation. Anyway, coming back to this. So yes, cow. Bon appetit, as they say. So it is Jagadatri Puja. It's a very auspicious day. We'll say something more about that later. Don't let me forget. So coming back to this idea of the Christ, if he didn't suffer at all, that would be wonderful. And we do actually have in Ramakrishna something very similar to this. So he's got throat cancer, and there's a lot of like languaging around Sri Ramakrishna's throat cancer that would present it as a kind of vicarious atonement. So Holy Mother said this, which I think is kind of like a serious burn. But Holy Mother was like, oh, to absolve Girish Ji of all of his like dark karmas, like Sri Ramakrishna was able to digest it through his throat cancer. Like, damn, imagine being Girish. I'd just be like, I'm out. I'm outie 5,000. But anyway, so this idea that he's sick, he's got throat cancer because he's taking on other people's karma, like that, of course, is a textbook vicarious atonement argument. Anyway, there's a case in Sri Ramakrishna's life where Hari Maharaj, later Swami Turiyanandaji, comes up to him and says, like, how are you feeling? And Sri Ramakrishna is complaining. In that moment, he's like, it's so painful, I can't eat. He's like, ow. And Hari Maharaj like has the gall to say, you're lying. He calls Sri Ramakrishna out on it. He's like, you say that you're in pain. This is a guru, remember. Like, in this world, if somebody told you that they were upset and you were like, no, you aren't, that would be so rude. That's invalidating their suffering. They're telling you they're in pain, and you're like, no, I don't believe you. You're not in pain. Like, I see through it. I see through your pretense. You're not actually in pain. Like, even if you know that, and a lot of people, of course, present more pain than actually is there, and that's fine. Like, that's just like the way that they interact with others, and that's okay. But like, I don't know, to people that really often people that really, really suffer are very quiet about it. And so like they're very like kind of shielded and guarded about it. It's very hard for them actually to talk about things but like often when maybe people want to present a certain way, they might present as being going through it more than they actually are, maybe. And maybe you see through it. But you won't, I mean, like even then it would be uncouth to be like, yeah, I don't believe you. No, we take people at their word. If somebody's telling us something, we like accept that. And we say like, okay, it's your testimony. And plus, who else is an authority on your life but you? If you're saying that you're suffering, then that you're suffering. And in fact, the doctor uses that metric, right? Like the doctor points to a scale and says on the scale of 1 to 10, how bad is your pain? And like again, we all have different pain tolerances. Someone's 1 is another person's 10. Someone's 5 is another person's 8. But that doesn't matter. It's a subjective scale. It's like relative to the person who's being asked. So for Hari Maharaj to say this to Sri Ramakrishna is kind of preposterous. To his guru, who's telling him that he's suffering, the correct response would be like to empathize with him, maybe to try to like alleviate his suffering. Like, oh, can I apply the ointment, or is there anything I can do? But no, Hari Maharaj just like kind of out and out said, "You say you're in pain, but I see that you're in bliss." And Sri Ramakrishna just like laughs about this. He's so delighted that Hari Maharaj is able to see this. And like the whole thing changes in a heartbeat. That's rare, because even when people like want to put on the impression that they're not suffering, like it's hard. It's like really hard actually to like stick to that all the time. And more importantly, when you are actually suffering, if somebody was like, "Oh, you aren't," and you did feel like you were, would you really just be able to like on a dime like that start laughing and suddenly your mood changes? Like no, unless it was like held lightly, unless it was like not really true, unless it was a pretense, like it wouldn't be so easy to just dismiss all at once. And that's what happened. Sri Ramakrishna just started laughing and he was completely like in a different mood after that. And he was like, "This bastard," he said, "this rascal has caught me out." That was the line that we got from Sri Ramakrishna. He sees the truth. Basically, he understands this Leela better, that I am in bliss. And so with the Christ, that Gnostic view that actually no, like at the whole way through, he's experiencing God. And so when he's like crucified and he says, Lama, Lama, Elahi, Elahi, Lama Sabachthani, that's a very controversial line actually, because it seems like Christ has lost his faith, right? To me, I think if you want a Halloween horror story, wouldn't that be scary? Like the idea of God's greatest devotee losing faith. Like we lose faith all the time, whatever. We're not God's greatest devotee. But like the idea of God's greatest devotee, Christ, that's what I'm going to call Ramakrishna. Like whether he's an avatar or not, like that's up to people to decide. But the fact that he was a devotee of Kali, nobody can deny. And the kind of devotion that he had for Kali is unprecedented. Similar to Christ, the kind of love that Christ had and expressed, like he was love incarnate. And so if that kind of person, if like that kind of lover, um, lost his faith in God. Oh my God. Isn't that scary? Yeah. I feel like a lot of this lecture is just Halloween horror stories, really terrifying moments in religion. Like the number one being like an article, 5 terrifying moments in religion. Number 5, renunciation. Number 5, orange men telling you to repress your sexuality. That's number 5. Like number 1, the really scary thing in religion, arguably, like putting aside all the institutional terror of like the Inquisition and all the widespread pedophilia in the church and like all the religious warfare that we've had to see which God is true and not. Putting aside all of that, like I think one scary thing for spiritual practitioners who are interacting with this in a deeper way is the idea of like someone like Ramakrishna losing faith or someone like Christ losing faith. And so this idea of Elahi, Elahi, Lama Sabachthani being a moment of weakness for the Christ is thrilling actually. It's theologically thrilling. It's interesting. If Christ is the avatara, even the avatara loses faith, that's wonderful. That's good for us. Because then we know that when we lose faith, like we can look at the avatar and say, even he in a moment of trial, like gave up on God because God gave up on him. So you could say like in that moment, Christ was experiencing his own theodicy, his own theological problem, like Vlad the Impaler. I live for the moment when I can compare Christ to Vlad the Impaler. But both of them are rejecting God. So the Christ might very easily have turned into a vampire here because that's what happens to Vlad, right? He rejects God and he gets cursed by God to become a vampire. So interestingly, Christ shouts out, he ejaculates, Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani, Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? Which is exactly what people say when they lose a loved one, when they feel like their loved one should have been protected. It's exactly what people say when they get ill, when they feel like God should protect them. It's the same sentiment, the sentiment of, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? And the Christ, like arguably like Vlad the Impaler, has every reason to feel betrayed because he gave his whole life to the ministry of the Christ. Imagine, you've given everything up, everything you personally wanted. Maybe the Christ would have liked a more intimate relationship with Mary, and I argue in many places that he had that, and there was a spiritual consort. But maybe he gave it up. He gave up the possibility of starting a family and like living a grounded and like loving life with his wife, Mary. Maybe he gave up being with his mother. Maybe he gave up all the things that the Buddha maybe gave up in order to pursue this quest. And after all of that, like at the end of everything, having given his life breath to the cause, he questions the cause. He questions God, for whom he did everything. And he says, Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani. Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? It's like a dark night of the soul for the Christ. If we zero in on that, we can get a lot of spiritual juice out of it. The idea of like what a dark night of the soul looks like. But the Gnostic, maybe like kind of like non-traditional interpretation here would be like, look, he's not suffering. He's not saying Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani because he's like suffering and has lost his faith in God. No, that would never happen to the Christ. Rather, and this is very interesting, rather, he's just singing. He's just quoting the Psalms. Because in fact, there is a Psalm. I forget exactly which Psalm, but there's a Hebrew song in which the opening line is Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani. So I'm very partial. I love this view because, and I've proposed this in many places, where it's like when the Christ is on the cross, what does he do? He sings. And what does he sing? Like when a person like that sings, they're obviously going to sing religious songs. And what religious songs are available to a rabbi in the Judaic tradition? Well, the Psalms. Like the yeah, right. You look on the bright side of life, like he sings psalms. Like, and by the way, this would make sense because look at all the other things that he did. This is interesting. A person who loses faith in God is probably not going to show up to the lecture. Do you know? And if they do, they're going to be kind of like you'll know, right? Like if I showed up to the lecture and I no longer believe in what I'm saying, I think it would be obvious. I hope it will be obvious. At least it is for me. There are some days when I just like maybe don't want to talk about this stuff because I don't believe in this stuff. Like I maybe something has happened which I've lost faith in it or something. There are moments like that, and I would not speak in those moments because where would the conviction come from? Where would the enthusiasm come from? I'm nothing if not enthusiastic. And where does that come from if not a conviction? And if you lose that conviction, then you'll lose the enthusiasm. So it's arguably the case that if Christ was really in a moment of despair, if he really lost faith in God, if he lost faith in the cause, he wouldn't be teaching. But he was. Like while he was crucified, he would like talk to his mother and be like, "Why are you weeping? Is he not your son too?" And point to someone who maybe was Mary's brother or something. I don't know. Like so he's like making these claims, he's like teaching people, he's like talking to the good thief and the bad thief. And there's this whole like kind of ministry that occurs there, like on that hill. Like he's like kind of forgiving people. Like a person in despair might not forgive, wouldn't be so open-hearted like that. He wouldn't maybe give instruction. So all of this seems to make a case for Elahi Elahi Lamak Sabatani not being a moment of despair, but being a moment of joy, of triumph. He's crucified, and yet, in the midst of his crucifixion, he sings to God, and he sings a religious song from his tradition, which everyone around him must have recognized. I can only imagine what that would have sounded like. I almost have a vision of like Aragorn in the final Lord of the Rings movie, like singing. Like there's like that beautiful song that he sings, it's like that kind of tone of like, and that's because an old English kind of Norse kind of tone, but something just like a cappella with a deep, resonant spiritual voice. And he's just singing, and everyone's standing there silently horrified, shocked. And there's a beauty, there's a peace, there's a joy because the Christ is beautiful and peaceful and joyful. He's not actually suffering. So I love this view, and I'm partial to it. And I love that Rooney Mara movie where it's like where she plays Mary, Mary of Magdala. One of my favorite Mary movies, and one of the few Mary movies that are out. And there, like Mary, it's a tragic movie, of course, in many ways. Of course, a tragic Leela. But Mary, in the beginning of the movie, when she's sitting with Christ, enjoying spiritual communion with Christ, implying maybe there might have been at least a spiritual, if not physical, relationship there. She expresses what spirituality feels like to her. And it's really a beautiful and telling scene. And Rooney Mara does excellently here, I think, because she somehow managed to convey how difficult it is to talk about this stuff. You're like, you can't really talk about like religion. It's beyond the mind. How can you describe Shambhavopaya? Abhinavagupta, when it comes to time to describe Shambhavopaya, he lapses into an incredibly heady analysis of the Sanskrit language, an incredibly esoteric unpacking of what e means. And by the way, last time I was in Denver, that's what we did, right? Like a Thursday night in Denver, like after Kuleshwari's excellent yoga class, the first time I met Danny actually, before we did our puja that evening, we were all having dinner, and like that was what that lecture was about. It was all about Abhinavagupta's like, or the tantric idea of like what the language means, like what each phoneme means. It's highly, highly esoteric and beautiful and complex, and like it's heady. And Abhinavagupta resorts to heady intellectual concepts when it comes time to describe something that's too subtle for the intellect. It shows you a kind of strategy also, like where you like maximize your intellect until you can go beyond your intellect, as it were. And then maybe it's just so heady that it stuns you. It's like a Zen koan. It's just like impossible to think on that level of refinement. So trying to do that will just like short circuit your mind, and then you'll experience that thing that he really wants you to experience, which cannot be spoken of, which everyone here has experienced. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And then hopefully regularly experience. That Shambhava Upai kind of resting in absolute reality, whatever you want to call it. Here, Runimara plays Mary Magdalene trying to describe this to the Christ. And the description is stunning because the Christ, of course, knows all about this experience. He is this experience. And he just wants to hear where his student is with all of this. By the way, I think it's River Phoenix, right, who plays the Christ. I think he's a very compelling Christ. And what you know what I really like about the Christ, if you don't mind this digression in that movie, is that he needs Mary to like help him teach. Because when he doesn't really know what to say, he like goes to Mary and he's like, "What do I tell them?" And Mary's like, "Tell them this." And then he goes and tells them, which is really important because that's what Sri Ramakrishna does. Sri Ramakrishna doesn't like have his own stuff. He like goes to Kali and then Kali speaks through him. And he doesn't have his own ministry. Kali has a ministry through him. Nitya Leela, that's my costume this year, it turns out. I actually even Digambari was so sweet. Digambari brought me this guy. And I'm like, maybe I should swap out my Bhairava Murthy for here's Digambari's present. He used to have arms, but I was just on a call with Rakta Rupini and Wyatt, like Ruby's child. He was like, "Can you tear him apart?" And I'm like, "Say less." Sorry, he doesn't have any arms now. Anyway, so where was I? Yeah, so this idea of like Rooney Mara like being Mary, like helping Christ with his ministry is very telling about the role of Shakti. Actually, Rakta Rupini on that topic, she was just like teaching me about like some of the initiatic traditions of Mary, like she herself is in one of those traditions. And she was talking about how there are traditions that argue that Mary initiates Christ into sexual sadhanas, like tantric, like feminine embodied forms of sadhana. So she initiates him into those, they're both guru to each other. So she initiates him into those forms of sadhana. And it's those forms of sadhana that help him build his ka, his etheric body. So of course, a lot of this is coded in Egyptian language, it's a cult of Isis, if you will. So Mary is a priest within the cult of Isis, which actually makes a lot of sense because there's a strong presence in the Levant and also especially in Alexandria and especially in Rome of these mystery traditions. Whether it's like Hecate or Persephone or Demeter or like more commonly Isis or more commonly some regional deity that's a like feminine force or something. But in any case, there's Kikodes as I don't know like what substance that might have been, but as scholars point to the text, they see this word Kikodes, which might mean like some kind of hallucinogenic or something. So these are perhaps orgiastic settings in which there's sensuality, there are drugs, like what you would expect in the smashan in the kind of kaula sense. And there are deep esoteric secrets, not only being revealed intellectually, but being transmitted in a kind of initiatic tradition. And these were mainly women, which I think is really interesting. These traditions in which we see a lot of abuse, in which like male patriarchs then use the teachings to like, I don't know, like non-consensually sleep with their students. Like that's problematic because it's men trying to do a woman's kind of spirituality. But arguably, historically speaking, these were like women, like the priestesses would run the temple and it would mostly be women in these communities. And maybe like not to overly excite you here, but like might have been more like sapphic in nature. It might have just been like a lesbian kind of orgy where women are. I know it's like your dream, like it's the best, blood and drugs and magic and lesbian orgies, and it could really have been that, like a really safe space in which women were able to like fully embody their spirituality, like a woman's spirituality, and arguably like that had to happen in secret. And we can go on a wonderful tangent here, I think, about veiling, like the power of the veil. Because arguably, like veiling is not necessarily something that's imposed upon a woman by society. Its worst version is that. But veiling is an external depiction of that which arguably in femininity, if you want to think in these archetypical terms, is the protection of the sacred. And the sacred is sacred because of its secrecy. So the veil, it's to hide something, but not because it's dirty or bad or transgressive in that sense, but because it's taboo. Taboo, arguably, in the sense of putting something aside to make sacred. It's one of the older definitions of taboo. It's like sin is error kind of thing. It's like one of those things where taboo doesn't mean bad. It just means special or put aside. So these things are considered taboo only insofar as they're done behind closed doors, behind the veil. So things that the high priestess might be associated to in the tarot, like that's that archetype, right? So arguably Mary, like the high priestess, is a priestess of Isis. And or at least she has the qualities of such a person. And she initiates Christ into that lila, into that tradition. And that's what, and because Isis, Osset is within an Egyptian context, we speak in terms of the Ka, and the Christ's energy body is magnified through these sadhanas. Essentially, he gets siddhis. And through those siddhis, he's able to like conduct his ministry, which is the kind of logic we get with Vivekananda and Ramakrishna. These are men, but like, don't be fooled. Like, this is a ministry of women. Like, Kali is the high priestess, and these are her vassals in the world. And they as much say so. They say as much. They're always like kind of upfront about this, that we are not the ones here that are presenting this. Kali is making us do it. And Vivekananda, to our point, often says against my will even. He tries to lie down, he tries to sleep, and Kali pushes him out of bed and forces him to do her work. And he said, she made a slave of me. So this idea of Christ being God's slave, like doing his bidding against his will also, like that's kind of valuable. Anyway, coming back to this Rooney Mara, Mary of Magdala thing. So Mary, she tries to express to the Christ what this feels like, which is of course a very difficult thing to do, spirituality. And she says, she's like, it's like being in water. I'm paraphrasing now. She's like, it's like being in water, or it's like watching birds fly in the sky. Weirdly enough, this is so crazy. These are exactly the meditation instructions that Sri Ramakrishna gives when it comes to meditating on the formulas. He says you should meditate on the formulas like you are a fish newly released into the ocean. And you should swim in the ocean and feel your freedom, or like a bird soaring by yourself in the sky. That's the feeling that one gets in Shambhava Upaya, if you will, if I can use that term, where you're just like, no words can describe it. But it's a freedom. And it's a freedom, importantly, that like is a metacognition. So it can occur, it can in in here, as it were, in anything. So it could be during a time of joy, a time of mundane peace, or a time of suffering. So she describes this to the Christ, this state. And it's so beautiful because the movie opens with a young Mary of Magdala, like splashing in the water, like she's like drowning almost, but she's suspended in water. And the movie opens with this beautiful, like visual of Mary in water. So they're trying to depict in film what Mary is describing as her spiritual experience. So it's birds in the sky or like water, right? Now, the Christ is getting crucified, and all throughout the film, we're distinctly aware of how close they are. The Christ confides in Mary. He needs Mary because like she represents to him his Shakti, but also his other half in the sense that she connects him to his emotion, to his body, like all the divine, feminine, masculine archetype stuff like can come from this relationship, right? But now she watches her boyfriend, her consort, her husband, her guru, her her best friend, her companion. I don't know about all of these words. I only know that she met someone who, for the first time, understands what she's talking about. For the first time, can see through the physical form or through the mental form and can like look into her soul and like share that space with her. Can you imagine how lonely her life must have been up to that point? And everybody is saying that she's like possessed by demons. Of course, that's a controversy in the church too. Like, is Luke's like exorcism narrative the same as the Mary of, other narratives? Like, that's also a controversy. We don't know that Mary was possessed by demons, but the public popular view of it is that she was possessed by these eight demons. Ruby sent me something funny. It was like, what was like I actually want this on a t-shirt. It's like Mary, like in a beautiful like Victorian painting, and she's like, what's a girl going to do when she's possessed by eight powerful demons? It's kind of like tee hee. So she's possessed by these demons, and Christ comes in Luke at least as an exorcist. So he meets her in the capacity of therapist or exorcist or something. So in the Rooney Mara depiction in the Mary Magdala film, Christ comes and sits with her and like talks to her for a bit, immediately gauges her adhikari, her spiritual competency, and is like, there are no demons here, my dear, like that. And she's like, wait, what? Like, you're the only person who doesn't see this as a problem. Like, you're seeing me in a way that no one ever has. And not only that, I feel like I'm seeing you in a way no one else has. And I think that's the relationship that they had. Like Christ, I mean, now I'm projecting, but like I think the Christ felt seen in a particular way. And Mary, certainly Mary must have felt seen. I mean, I'm sure Peter and all of Christ's disciples probably felt more loved by the Christ than anyone else in their life. Otherwise, why would they have given everything up to live? Even the foxes have their holes, but everyone gave everything up to wander with Christ in the desert. Why would they do that? Why would people follow Swami Vivekananda out to Kashmir, like these like high society ladies in England and in America? Why would they give everything up? Like literally, they gave all their money to Vivekananda and like followed him to India, which is a crazy place to go if you're like, in that time when you had to like travel in all these difficult ways and it's a foreign place and there's not English literacy, and to be there with Swamiji must meant that they loved him. They loved Swami Vivekananda so much because they saw in him something that was so pure and so true, and he saw in them something that had them feel seen. And so like like there was one woman who said, seeing you, Swamiji, is like meeting the Christ or coming to the Christ. I feel like this is a Bible story and I've come through the night to see the Christ. And Swamiji got very emotional. He said, would that the Christ was here, I would wash his feet with my own heart's blood. That devotion to the Christ that we saw in Swamiji. And of course, the idea of Christ being like a metaphor for many Americans and many people in the UK and many people all over the world to understand Swamiji. Swamiji was Christ-like to them. Again, I'm going to digress a little bit. I'm thinking of this beautiful scene where Swamiji's in Cairo, since we're talking about ISIS in Egypt. Swamiji's in Cairo and he's like walking down the street and he happens upon, so they're talking and they're like distracted in their conversation because Swamiji was often very given to lofty, very highly refined topics, right? Once you get him started, he will just discuss the very highest philosophy and lose himself in that. So they were walking and they meandered into a poorer section of the town, a section where there are many sex workers who are like out on the street. And the thing about this is that Swamiji at this time in his life is like so like not puritanical. Like this is fine for him. But his hosts were a little puritanical and they were horrified that they brought a holy man into what essentially was the red light district of Cairo at that time. And of course with all the views on sex workers at that time, it's like, oh my God, how could we have brought a holy man into this place, etc. And so these women are naturally like kind of catcalling him and like inviting him and whatnot. And they were shocked because they thought Swamiji, they were expecting a certain kind of reaction, but Swamiji instead softened and approached them. And I think like there was a very intimate moment where I think he like looked at one of the women and like held her chin or something. And he started crying. Like he just like started weeping. And he was like, "Oh mother, do not put your beauty something like don't put your beauty in your body or something. There's something to like I don't know, something happened, but it wasn't like, oh, like this is a bad thing to do. Like it's like sex work is bad. And it wasn't like that. It was kind of like he saw them in some way and said something. And we don't really know what he said. But what happened after was really interesting. The woman who he was talking to, who a moment ago was like, kind of coming on to, like, she like just her whole mood changed and she felt seen and she started like weeping and she fell to his feet and grabbed his coat and said, Hombre de Dios, Hombre de Dios. And because at that time in Cairo, I think even now, a lot of the people in that part of the town are not Egyptian. They don't speak Arab or like they're mostly like from various parts of Europe, but mostly like Spanish speaking. So she started saying, Hombre de Dios. And then suddenly all these people like thronged Swamiji, like all the sex workers in that district and many other people too all came and they all started thronging him and like trying to touch the hem of his garment. Like that was a very Christ-like moment. And it's very Christ-like in that he like almost like it's almost like he's forgiving he's like saying like he who has sinned cast the first stone kind of thing. Because his host were kind of judgmental about this whole thing. And they were shocked to see him approach the women. They were shocked to see him talk to the women. And the women were shocked to see him take such a tender, childlike tone with them and to see them and feel them in that way. And they cried and touched his hem of his. It was a beautiful, beautiful scene. Anyway, coming back to this idea of Mary, like Christ and Mary, like can you imagine what that must have been like? How deep and beautiful and profound that love must have been. I don't care if you like want to sanitize it and say there was no like sexual relationship. Last year I did that. I was like definitely taking a position of more like textbook kind of Ramakrishna Sarada, no sexuality involved. Because sexuality can be understood on so many levels, and this is sexuality understood in the refinement of samadhi. It's like it doesn't require genitals, and nor does it even require emotional intimacy. I don't have to get to know you. Like in order to like experience this. It's a soul to soul kind of thing, which actually is an Advaitic experience. It's not gender. There's no conversation about like heterosexuality or homosexuality or anything. Like it's just like the love of spirit, for God and God's devotee. Like that love, that is an ecstasy. It's a kind of sexual energy. It's kundalini. So all of that, we can describe it in, I think, rather may I say sanitized terms in that we could say, oh, it's Kundalini, but like in the upper experience. We can be very apologetic about this and we could say like, oh, it's like sex transcended, but it's like a deeper sex, etc. Or you can go the other way with it. And you can be like, no, like this same sexual energy, it's only really valuable when it's grounded in physical experience too. So if you just experience it as the union of the souls, then is it really a fully expressed Kundalini creativity, spiritual sex energy? Because that must encounter all levels. And so there's another claim here where it's like the problem is that for many people it's only in the body or maybe only in the mind. For some people it's in the spirit only. Neither is actually preferable. Maybe the latter for some people is preferable to the former, but the best case scenario is when it's all of those things, when it's like the fullest manifestation, and that you could make that claim for Christ and Mary. So last year, definitely I took a more right-hand path approach with this, and I was like, yeah, like with Ramakrishna and Sarada, we have no reason to believe that they had a physically intimate relationship. Except now, I'm going to challenge that because I might have some data or some evidence to argue for like what Shodashi Puja might have looked like. I don't know. That of course I couldn't get more banned anyway. So that's why I'm like a bit bolder to express some of these like wilder conjectures that I have. I'm like leaning into it a little more, some of the wilder conjectures. So it's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it, you know. But now the like accepting that there was no sex in that relationship and there was a kind of romantic and emotional intimacy that's far deeper, like even accepting all of that with the Christ, even dismissing the possibility of any physical biological relationship which comes with its own kind of attachment, it's still really crazy that the two of them, like to like for Mary to have lost the Christ. It's so painful. You can only imagine what it's like to lose the one person who you could confide in, who you felt really understood you, who you really understood. And it's like one in a million. Like no one is like the Christ. And arguably no one is like Mary. Like the Christ has no one like Mary. And so he appreciates her. And you can see how he appears to her first, maybe something you would do if you had a partner. Like when you came back, when you resurrected, who would you see first? Peter? No, you would see Mary first, like your beloved. And not only that, like in the movie, and coming back to that film now, there's so many scenes in which they're sitting by themselves and they're just talking, and you can feel like the connection between them is just so rich and so meaningful. Anyway, in one such talk, Christ is just sitting with his knees up in his chest, in a vulnerable moment, just asking her how it feels, how spirituality feels. With recognition, he's hearing her describe this birds and the sky kind of thing, etc., etc. Now, imagine the pain that Mary feels when she watches the one person that she like loves, maybe romantically, maybe emotionally, maybe physically, but of course spiritually, her spiritual teacher, her companion. Imagine what she feels when that person is being crucified and killed and there's nothing she can do about it. Oh my God, just imagine that. Um, Viranatha was saying, this is very hot. I feel like I'm burning up. And I'm like, wow, somebody is understanding the Christ force. Like somebody is getting this transformed eros kind of thing, you know. Somebody's like feeling Christ. But he means the costume, I think, right? Anyway, yes. And there's another reflection here. Sex done with someone unworthy ruins your spiritual gains or growth. You should know your Shakti before giving your body if you have sex with your half bar Shakti. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of like narratives around like what this kind of sadhana looks like. And of course, a lot of misunderstanding about it because the text about it, like Abhinavagupta's chapter 29, the Kaula text where we learn about that ritual, it's like in very high Sanskrit and it's very hard to understand like what these rituals might have looked like. Scholars might argue the only reason there's any consort practice in this puja is to produce the substances, semen and the female ejaculation, in order to be able to worship the deity with those substances. So the sex is like secondary, like that's just there to produce the sacrament for the puja. There's one view according to that. According to another view, no, you should only like enter into a sexual relationship with someone who really isn't matched with you. In fact, someone who's of a very low caste, ideally someone who you societally abjure, or someone who you like wouldn't ever like even look at, let alone sleep with. That's the person that you enter into this consort relationship with. There are all these different ways of looking at this particular kind of yoga, and to what extent this kind of yoga was available to Mary and to Christ, we don't know. And we don't really need to know at this point because like the only point we have to make now is that it's really hard for Mary to lose the Christ. So imagine her participation in the Christ Leela, and it really sounds like I've lost the plot. In one sense, I have, but I'll bring it all back to this is a conversation within a conversation within a conversation. We're taking a Puranic approach, okay? We're nesting a few different threads within, I think, a wider thematic concept, if you don't mind. I'm experimenting with different ways to lecture, if you don't mind. And by experimenting, I mean I'm unconsciously and impulsively doing whatever the fuck I want and just recognizing that it is indeed a dribble. But that being said, coming to this point, that Mary, for her to participate in Christ's Leela, is not easy. For her to participate in the will of God, for her to like do Christ's ministry means that she has to lose the Christ. Can you imagine? It might mean that she would like maybe prefer a world where Christ wasn't a spiritual teacher and just instead her husband or partner or her teacher. Like maybe she herself doesn't want to be like part of the thing that will kill her husband. Would you do it like if you really loved someone and you knew that participation in their ministry would mean their eventual death? Would you do it? Or would you rather like protect them? Would you say like you're more real to me than God and God's plan? And I don't care that you're like telling me that your life is devoted to God's plan. Like I care about you and I don't want you to go down this path because you'll die. And one has in mind like Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife or somebody like that, like being the wife of like a prominent statesperson. Like it's like if this person is fighting for a cause, sooner or later they might die. And not only that, what will it do to our home life? Like etc. So powerful people in society often, it's hard to be like in love with them. It's hard to like care about them because their life is given to something else. and their life is up for forfeit, as it were. And the Christ always knew that. So can Mary like actually participate in his ministry, which is really her ministry, honestly? Can she really do that if, in fact, she knows what the outcome is going to be? That her beloved is going to die? And yet she does it. And not only that, in the Mary Magdalene movie, the Rooney Mara one, like when Christ is being crucified and she looks at him, now comes something really profound, which we can see in the Swami Vivekananda poem, Let Shyama dance there. Oh no, sorry, Kali the mother. Who dares misery love? Who dares dance in destruction's dance? Who dares hug the form of death? To him the mother comes. Or in Let Shyama dance there, shattered be self, shattered be name and fame and hope. Make a funeral pyre of them in the heart and let Mother Shyama dance there. The idea of mother dancing ecstatically in the funeral pyre in the heart after your life is in ruins. Like, who has a taste for like abject ruin? And the thing is, like in the goth ethos, maybe like that's like fetishized, like death and decay and ruin is fetishized, but only if you can like have a boutique store and sell really expensive products in the name of death and decay because you yourself actually want to have a nice like and comfortable life. Like arguably, Kat Von D wants a beautiful house. She's very Eastern Orthodox now, but we go by her house sometimes, her old house, and they're like gargoyles and shit. And I'm like, I could really see myself living here. It's great. Danny probably would love it too. But like it's a nice house. Like arguably we want comfort and beauty and like pleasure. Like we don't actually want ruin. But the argument here is that like um this argument is that like in ruin, some distinct presence of God is possible. And Christ is feeling it, arguably. He's ruined and he's being crucified. And in the midst of that suffering, he's experiencing God. And now Mary, whose suffering is focused on in this movie, which I like, because we're always like looking at the Christ suffering, but what about his mother's suffering? What about his, dare I say, wife's suffering? Like his consort. Wife is cheapening it. It's consort. What about her suffering? And so the Christ is like dying, and Mary's watching him die, and she then looks up and sees the birds in the sky. And again, you get that depiction, film depiction of that mood of spirituality. So now she's experiencing God, ecstatic spiritual experience while she watches her husband die. Who dares misery love? Who dares hug destruction's dance? Who dares dance destruction's dance? Sorry. So this bhava of Christ being crucified against his will, of Mary like giving her husband up to God against her will, like all of this is actually fucked, right? Like it's painful, it's misery, it's suffering, and it doesn't need to be other than that. And of course, like some of the Gnostic like kind of reinterpretations of this is an attempt to like spiritualize it so that it's not suffering. We don't fetishize suffering. We don't make a religion out of like grief and heaviness. But again, if you look closely, you see it's not about suffering at all. Of course, the suffering piece is important because if the suffering piece isn't there, you won't get this. And this that I'm trying to describe is the alchemizing of suffering. It's what we talk about in the bowl of blood lecture. If there is something really painful, physically or emotionally, psychologically, like if there is some ruin or in our lives, like that's when the mental structures of who we think we are and what we think the world is, that's when those destabilize. And when they disintegrate, then we're plunged into the ocean of God and we swim like a fish ever free. Or we realize like we're in the sky of consciousness, floating like a bird with wings outstretched like that. There's a beautiful sense of freedom in that ruin. And arguably Mary is experiencing that. So coming back to the garden now, and this interpretation of the Christ like not wanting to be killed, um, this I think is an important point. If indeed he didn't want to be killed, then it's valuable that he was. Like it's very valuable that he was willing to go along with the Leela, with God's Leela, even when it wasn't his Leela. And so let thy will alone be done, which argues that my will is opposed to thy will. So all of this can be brought back now to the idea of freedom and sentiency and will. I have Amar Icha, my will in Bengali, and I have Ma Icha. And never the twain will meet unless I'm fully realized. But even if I'm fully realized, Hare, if I am the avatara himself, even then maybe they will not fully align, right? Because even Christ, who, I mean, what to say of realize, he is the Christ, he's the avatara, and even he, if you take this reading seriously, was not really with it. Like he was not with God's will, and yet he was willing to do it. So when he won't, God would, and hence he willed what God willed, as opposed to what he willed. And you can see that's a basis of Anselm's three dialogues and the whole like kind of discussion around the devil and what makes the devil the devil. He like willed against God, like what is it to will against God, etc. But now Christ is here subordinating, I think that's a better word, subordinating his will to God's will. So yeah, let thy will be done. Tadastu. Or we say Jai Ma, but like essentially we're saying the same thing. With Jai Ma, we're saying Tadastu, which is may it be done, or let thy will be done. Or there's inshallah, if God would be willing. Like these ideas are so powerful because they put a disclaimer. If I say I will see you at 7 p.m., I should always say actually, at least internally, Ma willing or God willing, because internally, inshallah is very important as a check and balance to thinking that my will is absolute. Because it's not. And it's in the tragedies of our life when we realize that. So Vlad the Impaler, his will. You didn't think I would bring it back, did you? I also didn't. And let's see how successful this will be. But Vlad the Impaler, he willed for his wife to be alive, and he willed for God to protect his wife. But God's will was different. And so now, when he is going to his religious authority about it, why did God will other than me? Like, why is it that it's not okay for me to have what I wanted? The pastor is not able to talk about this or not able to explain it. And this is Theodicy 101. This is when we realize that, like, we're fucked and maybe God doesn't exist. So, why would God exist if God is like this? And so, the mystery of God's will is really what you could say the Leela of Ramakrishna and Christ can ultimately be pointing to. Why did God do all of this? Maybe it's just a Leela, maybe it's just a whim, maybe there is no why. But there's something about God's will and something about how our will might often be against God's will. And what it means, and this is the claim, what it means to follow God's will is to avoid our own. And hence you get wonderful, beautiful traditions around that. Mm, that express like a more like deny thyself vibe, which the Christ actually said, which Ramakrishna in many places expressed, which Vivekananda in many places expressed, which we in our community have in many places expressed. We can't lose this piece also. It's a scarier piece, a less comfortable piece to talk about in spiritual life. And the reason I'm very fierce about it is because I often see it used in a really unskillful way, but like in a way that makes for a lot of shame and for a lot of guilt, which is not the bhav, honestly. But here, if we take this view seriously, we get something very valuable out of it, which is like if I don't do what I want to do, what will happen is what God wants to happen. Because what God wants to happen is a separate will from my own. So accepting some duality here, if I step away from myself, I step towards God. And so every action that I can take to step away from myself, whether it's fasting or keeping vigil or holding my tongue. Honestly, people fast and keep vigil all they want, but like it doesn't really help them because where it matters, they don't practice restraint. They don't hold their tongue before they say something terrible. They're so mean. And like where's all your austerity if that is even something you can't control? So like not saying mean things, like saying helpful things, maintaining silence. Like, these are all practices that we do to will against what my body and what my mind and what my conditioning wants, what my society wants. So the thing about vampires, which I think is also fascinating for people, is that there's a social outcast like kind of vibe to them. They're lonely. They only come out at night. They can only hang out with people who are like them, which many spiritual people resonate with because they don't feel like they belong to society. They feel like they live in a different world, a world of night, which is something else I want to get to. The daytime, at least, I mean, I'm going to speak metaphorically. I actually feel this very literally. But metaphorically, the daytime is linked to the conscious logical mind, the Pingala Nadi. And it's the conscious mind that reasons and discerns and like that judges, by the way, because discerning requires judgment. And so time is very real during the day, isn't it? Like you wake up in the morning, you just want to get stuff done. Like you want your to-do list and you want like don't you feel like when you wake up in the morning and when you have your day, don't you feel a kind of pressure to like perform or to like achieve or to accomplish? And like it doesn't even matter where you are in your life. There will like, as a parent, as a child, as a student, as a business owner, as an employee, as I don't know, whatever you are in your life, probably during the day, even as a sadhu, right? Like living on the banks of the Ganga, when daytime comes, you are seized with this, in my opinion, irrational and absolutely diabolical urge to like do shit. You know? I find it diabolical because it's rooted in this kind of hubris of control, I think. But that's only because like I'm in some ways like every day killing this conscious, rational, reasoning mind. Like I'm very much in my Vama Nadi or my Ida Nadi. So like this whole vibe of the daytime is not for me. Why? Because the conscious, reasoning, logical mind, the mind that like plans and shows up to things. This is my excuse for why I'm always late. Sorry. But like the mind that's like able to keep all of this together is good. And I often say like that's very important. Like that should be developed. And I'm not gonna lie, my logical mind is highly developed through years and years and years of training. But like that takes you to a point, but it definitely can't take you to God. And like the goal of philosophy is a learned ignorance. Of course, it should be there. So that's the daytime. The daytime often represents that. That's why in many mythological structures, the sun is seen as masculine. Maybe because the sun projects and radiates, and maybe because of the Pingala Nadi, because the sun is associated to reasoning and to effectiveness and whatnot. But then when the night comes, something changes. Like once the sun starts to set, the whole vibe changes. Arguably, like we switch into the Ida Nadi. We switch into, dare I say, if I may, a more feminine mode of being, where it's like time is not that important. Like the whole night just feels like one moment. The sun sets and the sun rises, and then the whole thing just feels like a dreamlike blur. And that whole thing, like nothing good happens after 2 a.m. kind of vibe. It's like there's something taboo about the night, something transgressive about the night, because you're no longer thinking the way you would when you're awake. At night, everything feels more imminent, more present, more urgent. Like we might more this person, you might know them in the daytime, and like because of your lives, like you're not able to actually explore any intimacy. But then night comes and you don't give a fuck what the consequence would be to like making out, and you make out. And you're like, whoa, like that would have never happened unless it was after 2 a.m. But notice that kind of thing is why the night has a very bad reputation because people often do things at night that they regret during the day. Do you know? Because there's something different about the night. And therefore, spiritual practitioners and artists and writers and all sorts of people have really enjoyed the nighttime. Maybe because of the privacy that the night affords. You're by yourself, you can think finally. Maybe because like you can't really do anything anyway. Like it's not like in a more primordial sense. Like you can't step away from the fire. So you don't have to think about gathering this or gathering that or like hunting this or like doing anything. Like you just have to sit. Yeah, like right, the liminal space that is Waffle House. It's too much light in there though. But yeah, like when you get to Waffle House, you're like, wow, like these people, it's something about Waffle House after 2 a.m. You're like, this is a different loca. There are different people who are out at this time, and it's dangerous. There's like more crime at night. Like you're more likely to get hurt in every sense of the word at night. And I remember one time I was in the back of a car, like having not slept for a while and staring out. I was like, I wish it was night all the time. And the person next to me was just so like grounded and practical. And they'd be like, crime rates would go up. That's all they said. It was so sweet. I remember like hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh yeah, I had never considered that. I was just like dreamily looking out the window of the back seat of this car. I'm like, I wish it was night all the time. I was saying like, I wish it was waning moon all the time. I wish it was the new moon all the time. I wish it was night all the time. I hate the waxing moon. I hate the day, and I'm okay with the full moon actually. I have some good significance of full moon. But I was like making this point. I was like, I wish it was night all the time. Kali Bob kind of vibe. And the person was just like, yeah, crime rates would go up. I was like, fuck, I never thought of that. And it's true. It's true. The crime rates would go up because that's typically when crime happens. It's typically when bad decisions are made, quote unquote bad decisions. So having said all of this, there's an Ida Nadi, a channel, as it were, associated to femininity, to introversion, to creativity, to dreams, to imagination. And if that's very active, you might really suck at like functioning in the world. Like your day-to-day life might be really difficult because you're not made for the sunlight and you're not made for the reasoning of the world. Whereas nighttime, you really come alive, where like your logic is a different kind of logic, which can only be understood by those who like have that same kind of logic. And it's equally logical. It's just logical in a different way from the sunlight. So like I have a fondness and preference for the night. We argue that Kali doesn't wake up until nighttime. We only really start worshiping Kali like maybe after 11 p.m. or 12 p.m., which of course makes it really weird that I have these morning calls. And I know some of you, I have to apologize to you because for whatever reason, like I put on the calendar that there were some slots to like call at like 9:30. I don't know in what world I was gonna ever make those. So I'm just sorry that I have to keep canceling them. I think I have to like make them a different time. So I was like the only time I have to like do these 101s probably is like in the morning. Like 9 is okay. Like I probably get like 3 or 4 hours of sleep and then get going. No, no. Now these days, like getting home at 9 would be good, 9 a.m. But my point is that there's something about spiritual life and creative life, and dare I say romantic life. There's something about those things in life that are irrational yet deeply meaningful that seem to be associated with the nighttime. And so the association between vampires and the nighttime is a very important one because not only are they socially outcast, they also abide in like a literal different time zone. Like they're nocturnal, not diurnal. And where the rest of us have our being during the day, they have their being during the night. So they're like parallel lives, as it were. And as Nitya Leela is pointing out, once you have a being that's nocturnal, that like lives at night, of course you're gonna be romantic as fuck. Because the nighttime is associated with taboo, with transgression, with romance, with sensuality, but with mystery, with poetry, and of course with spirituality. So vampires, of course, very religious coded. They're always very Catholic or Christian coded, very spiritual coded, at least in the Western depiction, in film and in music and whatnot. So, I mean, like the Marilyn Manson song, literally one of my favorite songs about vampires in the world. Like Marilyn Manson opens with the song is called "If I Was Your Vampire," and it opens with Yeah. Back then, whenever I had a crush on a girl, like that would be like the first song, obviously, that I would send them because I'm like testing them. I'm like, anyway, so that opening lyric is 6 a.m. Christmas morning. Like, it's an important lyric because the fact that it's Christmas morning is important. Like Christ and the Christ force and the whole world of like religion is overcoded on the vampire mythos. And of course, it has to be 6 a.m., like before dawn. And it has to be like all of that. The whole in that song, you can see the myth of like eat like love being violent, love being associated to death, a scorpionic sex and death kind of transformation arc. Like all of that comes with the vampire. And I think the social ostracization of the vampire, the idea of the vampire being there at night only, and only being able to come out at night, meaning a person who's fully established in the Ida Nadi or something. Not to say that's desirable. Of course, in Shushumna Nadi, the balance of both is ideal. But you can see there's some appeal to that, especially to the conscious mind that longs for a reality beyond its reason, beyond the cage of its logic. We look at the vampire and we say, that's something to aspire to. Although it seems like it's dark, there's something about it that's problematic, that seems even evil and abhorrent to us. And yet we cannot resist that fatal attraction. Isn't that beautiful? So I'd imagine that like Christ and Mary, there's something similar to this. And Ruby showed me a picture actually of Mary like licking the wounds of the Christ. It's like the hottest thing ever. How sensual. But like Mary with blood all over her mouth, like lapping up the Christ's like side wound, you know. Like there's a viable Christian reading. I know Laleshwari is just like, let me get my hands on that photo. I know you would enjoy it. But like Mary as Dākinī, you know, like that idea of like there's blood and there's death, but it's like sexy and it's like transformed eros and it's all about God. Like all those things coming together is an important energy that I think we get a lot in Christianity, especially Catholicism, if not also in Ma Kali. That's why those two traditions are, I think, very like eerily concomitant because you'll see the very similar transformed eros kind of suffering and divinized kind of bhava there. Okay, anyway, having said all of that, this idea of will, if I will against God, there will kind of be some, if I will against myself, there'll be some kind of suffering to it. Right? But that's valuable because that suffering becomes ecstasy, it becomes beauty. It's like transgressed, transcended like that. So there's a whole like logic to this idea of willing and willing against God. Now, when you take a non-dual view, though, things get more complicated because now in the non-dual view, my will is actually God's will on every level of being. So I can't separate my will from God because I can't separate my being from God. God is the body, God is the mind, God is all the flow of biological impulses and psychological impulses. Like we all relate to each other differently because of different biological conditioning. God is the prima mobile behind that. The reason we have the bodies that we have and the appetites that we have. The reason that we have a psychological being is because of God. Like God ensures that we are born into a certain context, we hear certain ideas. By the grace of God alone, we understand certain ideas, assimilate certain ideas, forget other ideas. Some ideas really have an effect on us. By the grace of God alone, we see the films that we see, we hear the music that we hear. Like God sculpts at every step of our journey the kind of psychological being we're going to be. What to say of the physical entity that we are through which God's Shakti manifests. So now every physical desire and every mental desire and arguably every inspiration, every stirring in the soul is all of it seen as the outpouring of God's will. Because now it seems like if I do what I truly want to do, and arguably that's not just eating chocolate cake and like having sex and like listening to the music I like, arguably that's like deeper. It's a swadharma idea of like expressing myself truly on the deepest level of my being. That's actually probably going to feel like willing against the rest of society. And maybe at times it's going to feel like willing against God because often the only understanding I have of God is through that very society that misrepresents her anyway. So to will against God, really what that looks like is willing against the norm, willing against society, which arguably you will do when you will from the deepest place of your will. When you will from the point of inspiration, I will express myself. I will do what I came to this world to do. That radical Promethean individuality, that might be more religion than religion is religion. Because in the name of doing God's will only, as opposed to my will, we cut ourselves off from so much power, from the body's power. We say, I am not the body, and then we hate the body, and then we demonize the body, and then we starve the body. How can you practice spirituality when you won't even eat a piece of fish and now you're anemic and getting sick all the time? You know, like, how will you practice spirituality if there isn't the nerves, the literal nerve tissue to be able to handle the shock of these spiritual feelings? Like, how will you practice spirituality if you're depressed all the time? So, what we found in the very valid experiment of trying to deny thyself, what we found is that the thing that needs to be denied, maybe, is self hatred. You know, because what is the self but the sense of separation? And so that self-hatred, that sense of separation comes from this like dualistic idea that there's a good, there's a bad, there's a pure, there's an impure, there's a God and there's a me, and God is good and I am bad. So this idea of I am bad, that is what needs to be denied. In fact, to deny thyself is to deny that I am separate, arguably. So you could say there's like, that whole reading comes from there. So you can see it's really valid then to claim, it's really valid, I think, to claim that when you will other than what God wills, that's perfectly spiritually ennobling. So it's good then to think that the Christ didn't want to be crucified and that he freaked out about it in the garden and like as he was being crucified, experienced a dark night of the soul in which he called out to God, cried out in despair, Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani. Like that's the traditional view, actually. Challenged, as we said earlier, by the maybe spiritualized view where it's like the Christ never suffered. He was fully aligned with God's will. When he was being crucified, he was giving teachings. He was in a very high state. And what he says when he says Elahi Elahi lama sabachthani is not a confession of losing faith in the cause and in God, but rather it's him just quoting Psalms. It's him singing the religious songs of his people. It's in a state of joy that one sings. Arguably, actually, to be fair, the Psalms are very lamentations kind of vibe. It's a very lamenting kind of vibe, but it's creative, it's beautiful. So he's creatively, beautifully expressing himself with this lament, Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani. But he doesn't actually think that God has forsaken him. He's totally down for the plan. He's down with the sickness. He's like down for everything. It's his will. He is God. So he as God is willing that God be crucified. And so he's forgiving people. He's like doing this whole thing. And that's a nice way of looking at things too. And that's what we got with Ramakrishna. Hopefully you can see the link there with the Hari Maharaj, like I see you're in bliss kind of story. So there Sri Ramakrishna drops the mask, drops the Leela and presents the bliss that he's experiencing within, inherent in that, in the throat cancer and the pain of not being able to eat. Coming back to this case, we get the Christ in this mode of like being in ecstasy and actually not suffering the crucifixion. At no point is the Christ suffering. It's all part of his Leela. And there are also very valid views where it's like, it's not like he's even there. Like in the Ramayana, there's this idea that Ravana cannot actually kidnap Sita. What he kidnaps instead is Sita's shadow. Isn't that a beautiful idea? It's the Chaya Sita that's being kidnapped. There's a whole like Ramayana kind of understanding like that. Similarly, it's not the Christ. The Christ is like there. He's like chilling. He's like a docetic kind of chiller. And it's like the Christ, this is not, it's by proxy that he's being crucified, etc. Now those are non-traditional, very like esoteric views of the crucifixion. Even modern channel texts like the Course in Miracles is going to present that view. The Christ never suffered. There is no suffering, especially not for a spiritually realized being. Na dukhena guru napi vichalete. It's in the Bhagavad Gita. If you've attained this, there will be no suffering. And since the Christ, what to say of attaining this, he's the avatara, he shouldn't suffer. But according to another view, and this is where we bring the Kali, like Halloween stuff in, like really full force. According to another view, and arguably the more mainstream view, which very rarely I will defend, right? Like arguably, according to the mainstream view, there was no part of this that the Christ like enjoyed. Like he was freaking out in the garden. He suffered being denied thrice by his core disciple. He suffered the pain of crucifixion, and he actually, the worst pain of all, he suffered a moment of despair, having lost faith in his father, who for him is real. It's not that he's like, I don't believe in God. It's like, I believe in God. And you know what's worse? I don't believe that God is all good and all just. And I don't believe that God, like having sacrificed everything for him, is going to do anything for me. Like he's not here for me now. And again, the whole argument is he could have avoided this whole thing. He's like reluctantly kind of going along with this Leela. But then in the Rooney Mara, Mary of Magdala film, which we were raving about earlier, and this I think is the key point, is like the focus there is not on the Christ and the Christ suffering. It's the focus on Mary and her suffering of losing the one person in the world who understands her. There, like the thought-provoking thought experiment that I propose to you is this. Like if you were Mary, and you can think like you're talking to a Joaquin Phoenix and being told that you don't have any demons actually, and that what you're experiencing is spiritual and like actually beautiful, and there's like there's a tradition around it, and like so your teacher, the person that you look up to, the person that you have deep spiritual companionship with, who confides in you, and like the thing that I was saying earlier is that like it's so rare to be seen on this level. Very rarely can we see others on this level, and very rarely can you be seen on this level. So keeping all of that in mind, the things that we described earlier at length, she's watching her boyfriend slash husband slash partner slash consort. These are all things that cheapen what this relationship was. But she's watching her person like get killed. And that's not even it. The fact that she knew that this would happen, or that she was like, there were intimations of this, and yet she was willing to participate in the Leela. Like, you can read that in two ways. You could say she really understands the Leela and she really understands he's not going to suffer, so she's really down for it. But also, if you humanize it more, you could say that this is a woman who is in love with a man who loves her back, who have a unique relationship, who now has to participate in a ministry that will eventually lead him to be killed and that would eventually lead her to like running the rest of the ministry in his name. Like, would you be okay with that? And so the idea that Mary is willing against what she would naturally want is important too. So here you get the deny thyself teaching in full force. The Christ denies himself, as Peter denied him thrice. He denied himself because he didn't want to die, but he did. That's sacrifice. And Mary denies herself. Maybe she denies herself a possibility of a beautiful life with the man that she loves, like she denied herself that in the name of the mission. So that willing against, I think is a beautiful idea. And I don't want to like sully that. I don't want to damage that, take away from that. And I think it's very beautiful in martyrdom. There are stories where like Saint Bernard, for instance, is being cooked and he like allegedly he tells his persecutors, now flip me over, this side is well done. Have at it. Time to dine or something. He says something really cheeky like that. So there are all these like legends of martyrs who are being martyred, and as they're being burnt at the stake, they're like funny about it. They're cute about it. And they might be singing, they might be praying, they might be talking to the Christ. They might not scream. And then like when you see things like this, and of course these things have passed into the stuff of legends, but when you see martyrdom in like the Roman Colosseum, which again might not actually happen, but if such a thing were to have happened, and of course martyrs exist in all cultures for all reasons, you might be surprised to see that these people aren't suffering the way that normal people suffer. They seem to bear their suffering with such lightness and, dare I say, such joy. It seems like they dare to love misery. They dare to dance in destruction's dance. There's a kind of lightness and freedom that is there even in suffering, which is the value. So we as humans who don't like to suffer fetishize spiritual life as the end of all suffering, and then we see the most spiritual people in our communities being killed in the most awful ways, and we look at that and we're like, that is the only way I could have understood spirituality. Because here's a person who is suffering who doesn't seem to be suffering. Now I'm saying there's a more radical reading here, which is like, no, they're actually suffering. They're just like into it. Like to say that like they're so exalted that they're not feeling Saint Lawrence, thank you. It's not Saint Bernard, it's Saint Lawrence who's being cooked. But like the person who's being martyred, if they don't feel their body, then what's the value there? Like like then they're not like us. If they don't feel their body, they don't actually feel their body in pain when they're being burnt alive, then what? Then that's the value is diminished. If they aren't psychological beings, if Mary isn't a woman, a young woman, priestess as she might have been, spiritually advanced as she might have been, the Divine Mother herself, does she not feel? Does she not, as a woman, feel like a love for her? What do you even call that? And we saw that in Holy Mother clearly when Sri Ramakrishna died, how she wept. She said, Kali, why have you left me? It was like almost like Elahi Elahi Lamak Savatani. It's like, Kali, why have you forsaken me? You know what? I think, oh my God, that would be a better translation of the Bangla. It's usually translated as Kali, where have you gone? Or Kali, why have you left me? But you know what? I think Holy Mother crying in the night because she lost the love of her life is eerily like the Christ crying out on the cross, Elahi Elahi Lamak Sabachthani. She's saying like, my beloved, where are you? Kali, why have you left me? Why have you forsaken me? It's a weird thing for Kali to say, right? Like Kali, incarnated as Holy Mother, is crying because Kali left her when Sri Ramakrishna died. And Sri Ramakrishna, this is so interesting, appears to her in a vision. She's like mourning and she's taking off her bangles, like these bangles that typically you would wear, like you would take them off. A woman takes them off when her husband dies. Gold bangles, things like that. As she was taking them off, Sri Ramakrishna appears docetically and comes to her and says, "Why are you mourning? Like, why are you acting like it's a funeral? Like, don't you know I'm not dead? I've just moved into the other room." And that thrilling idea, like my father's mansion has many rooms kind of idea. It's like, no, it's chill. It's like I'm not in the physical plane, but I'm a siddha, I'm still here. There's so many reasons why Holy Mother did not have to grieve. But you know what? Did that help her? I think a little bit, but she was still sad after that. Like after she saw Ramakrishna in that vision, and she had many beautiful visions. One was of Ramakrishna like walking to the Ganga, and we went to the place actually where she had this vision. It's so beautiful. Neelam Babu's garden house. And like she's there and she's looking at the Ganga and she watches Ramakrishna walk into the Ganga and dissolve into the river. And then she sees Vivekananda come into the Ganga afterwards and start splashing water at a big gathering of people who have gathered on the banks of the Ganga to receive this holy sacrament. And she's regularly communing with Ramakrishna because she's having visions of him. But that doesn't help that she's still a woman in the world who like craves physical proximity with her beloved. She still wants to be there with him and hear his voice and hear him sing and hear him laugh, even if through a peephole. Sometimes she would just see him through like a little peephole because of the conservatism of that tradition and culture. So like that was so important to her. And now it's gone. Her person is gone. I know, I know. Actually, my favorite place in India, I think, is the Ramakrishna's room in Dakshineshwar. I sit there more than I sit anywhere else in the temple, actually. I love sitting in the temple, but like Ramakrishna's room. I can't even go in anymore these days. But you can sit on the side in the corner. Anyway, so she said, how do we know? Because she actually asked sadhus. Every time she would meet a holy man, she's Holy Mother for crying out loud. She is the Divine Mother incarnate. Whenever she met a holy man, or at least apparently holy man, of course, we trust her discernment. She would ask him, "Is there something I can do to get over my grief?" Isn't that crazy? Not only that it wasn't just that she was grieving. She was also like a human trying to do something about it, trying to heal it. She was sad and didn't want to be, which is distinctly human. So she approached these sadhus, and one sadhu was so beautiful, told her to do the panchatapa, which is a crazy austerity of like having four fires, and you sit in between these four fires in all four directions. And the fifth fire is the sun. So that's like hovering overhead. And so in the midst of these five fires, from dawn to dusk, every day for a number of days, you just sit without any water, without any food, and you do japa. It's an intense austerity. The heat of the fires, you become very dizzy, etc. And she performed it and successfully performed it. And the reason she was doing this is so beautiful. It's not because she was trying to connect to God or because she was trying to make spiritual progress. She was just trying to feel better about having lost her beloved. And I'm like hoping that you will see in your mind that like scene of the Christ, like burdened by his ministry, and not only by his ministry, but by his mysticism, played by Joaquin Phoenix so wonderfully, like with his knees drawn up to his chest, sitting before the sun rises, sitting with perhaps the only person who can ever see him in that way, with Mary, and like they're sharing that very quiet moment in the pre-dawn light of discussing what spirituality feels like, and sharing that wordless joy. With Ramakrishna, she had that feeling, and now she can't have it anymore because he's not there. She wakes up and the dawn is without her beloved. So she does this austerity to like finally feel better about things. And allegedly it helped. She said, my grief diminished a lot. And not only that, she said, I barely felt the heat of the fires. Sri Ramakrishna was with me. Throughout the whole thing, she felt his presence more tangibly. I told you they're airing New Moon in the theater down the street. Like the fact that the restraint that I'm here giving this lecture and not going to see the screening of New Moon at the AMC down the street. Okay. But like like there's like this whole thing where like the only reason Bella is like doing crazy shit is because she wants to feel the presence of Edward or something. Like he's just like he appears only when she's trying to kill herself or something. So she becomes really suicidal. Something like that, where like when Holy Mother did something really crazy, that was when Ramakrishna would feel most present to her. So she like did that crazy austerity and didn't have to do it again. It like the grief subsided after that. But anyway, all of this is to say, Mary might have felt real grief. Both Mary the mother and Mary the Shakti, and also Mary of Lazarus, who maybe was a sister-in-law. Everyone who loved the Christ, Peter most of all, can you imagine how he must have felt after those three times? Like they all felt grief. And arguably the Christ felt grief. And arguably God felt grief. Like maybe we don't need to spiritualize away that grief, that pain, and that sadness. And all of it comes from willing against what I want, right? Like that's one view. But then now the non-dual view. The non-dual view is like there's no body that's not Kali. Everything is maximally Kali. So everything the body wants is Kali wanting through the body. So it's natural and good that the body should desire food. And it's horrifically unnatural that we should fast and starve the body, because to do so would be to torture Kali in the form of the body that very naturally gravitates towards the things that the body wants. This is also in the Gita. Shri Krishna says, whoever tortures the body in the name of austerity is really just torturing me. And he's pointing out a culture in India, a culture all over the world. I mean, arguably in the Da Vinci Code, when you meet that guy who's like whipping himself, he's like the epitome of Christian guilt and shame and like self-hatred. That's denying thyself, but in a very arguably psychologically harmful way, because there, what you're seeing is mortification of the flesh, because the flesh again is myself and I'm denying myself. So therefore I should not eat and I should not do all the things that the body wants to do. The body is evil and women are evil and the womb is evil, etc. All of that comes from the idea that the body is not me. No, sorry, sorry, the body is me. My bad. The idea that the body is me and I should deny thyself. And Christ said, "Deny thyself." I deny the body, so I won't eat, and I won't just deny my body. I'll deny yours, because I'll force you into a school, and in that school, I'll put you in a uniform, and then in that uniform, I will tell you that like all your appetites are unholy and terrible, and etc. Right? So it's denying myself, which creates this kind of self-hatred, which is then projected outwards at others, especially at women. So we get that. Then denying the mind arguably is even worse, because the kind of person that I am psychologically becomes abhorrent. the things that I like, maybe the music that I want to listen to, the thoughts that I think, the ideas that I have, the very questions that I might want to ask my religious authorities, all of these become super taboo, super problematic. Because I'm denying myself, I should have no problem with denying all of these. And what to say then of an inspiration? I want to do something like play trombone in a jazz band or something. Maybe I will go to war with that. I'll deny that inspiration. And that's why being gay is deeply problematic within this cultural context, whether it's in Catholicism or anywhere else, because I want something that I think I should not want. And that's true of every want, actually, like within the context of denying thyself. But now the claim is very subtle. You to deny yourself means you have to deny yourself. But if the body is what you are, then deny the body. But is the body what you are? It is not. It's prakriti. The body belongs to nature, and neither is the mind you. How can you deny thyself when the mind belongs to Ma? So when you take this all is Shakti ideal, even if you want to separate yourself from the Shakti, you put on the side of Shakti everything but consciousness. Meaning the person that you think you are is Kali's. The body that you think that person is associated to is Kali's. And whatever Kali wants to do through that body, you no longer have a problem with. In other words, you feel every desire that arises in the mind and body is Kali embodied. Hence, in Kali Puja, there's a very significant moment when we divinize desire. And we say, she is a woman with red skin, typically depicting a kind of transformed Eros or liberated Eros, wearing red clothes. So that's an important motif. And she has jewelry, and she's beautiful. Her name is Kamini, by the way, beautiful woman, who is maybe the poetic depiction of desire and Eros par excellence. And this beautiful woman rides a lion. Again, the lion is a symbol of Rajas. So it's a pure like animality and bestiality. And she rides it. She rides the power of the lion, and she has weapons because she's fierce. It's a fierce energy that can easily wreck your shit. And desire does that when at 2 in the morning you make out and you're like, this could ruin the rest of our lives. And yet, whatever, it's 2 in the morning. It's like there's a different kind of logic when desire takes precedent. When we live from the heart as opposed to the head, we see the structures in our life falling apart, and we prefer our false prisons and the false security that our crypts give us to the open air cremation ground. We prefer that crypt to the sky, and therefore we don't want to actually follow our heart. But when we do, we have to recognize also the ferocity of it, the way in which it can destroy everything that we think we know. So therefore, the goddess in the form of Kamini, there's a meditation, Kamini Dhyana. She is red, wearing red clothes, seated astride the shoulders of a lion, carrying various weapons, ornamented and beautiful. She is holding a conch, shankha chakra, a discus, dhanur, bow, and arrows, and all of that stuff. And it seems like Durga, Jagadatri more specifically. So this goddess, Jagadatri, is the goddess of desire. She's red. Jagadatri always has red skin. She's the holder of the world. And arguably, Holy Mother's Ishta was not Kali, arguably by Kula Devata, her Ishta was Jagadatri. She received a Jagadatri mantra. And today, Jagadatri Puja is very important for Holy Mother and for her family. Their family observed Jagadatri Puja every day. And Holy Mother herself had many visions of this goddess, Jagadatri. So, to close out and maybe open for some Q&A, I want to show you places in our Padathi where we do encounter things like that. Oh, actually, I'm ah, this is the problem. I'm in a very nice part of the Padathi that I want to like focus on, but it's okay. Let me just how do I how do I you guys, I don't know what to do. Anyway, there's a part of the Padathi where I don't know how to like flip to it, but there's a part of the Padathi where you get the Dhyana mantra. Maybe I'll put it in the description of this video. Dhyana mantra meaning meditation mantra of Jagadatri. And it goes like this. Om kam singaskandam samarudham raktavarnam chaturbhujam nanalankara bhushadyam raktavastra vibhushitam shankachakra dhanurvana virajitakaram bhujam. And it's a hymn to invoke desire. Kamini, the goddess desire. But you do that in the beginning of the puja, and the moment you do that, what you've done psychologically in the puja, as you chant this mantra, as you visualize this goddess, is you've psychologically um associated desire with the goddess. And now the question becomes which desires? Like, are desires categorically different from one another? Is there a physical desire and then an intellectual desire and then a spiritual desire? That's what it feels like, right? Like, often our body wants X, our mind wants Y, and the spirit wants Z. Like, there seems to be a kind of conflict. What we're asking for here in the prayer is that make my desires one, like integrate me so that all my desires flow in an even flow of expression. And that can be expressed in the body, in the mind, and in the spirit. Ideally, the spirit expressing through the mind and the body has no like dissonance. There's no cognitive dissonance here. It's all one even flow. And but the recognition of desire as divine is already radical. To say that if I want chocolate cake, it is the goddess herself who wants chocolate cake through me. That's radical. And to be okay with eating chocolate cake, that's radical. So coming back to the vampires then, right? I hope you're appreciating how many threads we have in this conversation and how many different pans are like being put on the fire right now. But like coming back to the vampire thing, the idea of vampires being only there at night with the Ida Nadi reference and whatnot, the idea of vampires being socially outcast, those are of course very important, very attractive for spiritual aspirants because that's the experience of most spiritual aspirants. But the idea of vampires being evil in a not altogether unwholesome way, or vampires being bad in a somewhat alluring way, or vampires sort of referencing a religion that is counter to the understood concept of religion, all of that is really attractive because that's exactly what Vamachara does, what the Kaula Marga does. It says that to practice religion doesn't actually mean demonizing the body or demonizing the mind. What Christ meant by deny thyself is perhaps denying judgment at all. Judge not lest ye be judged. And like, how can we, who have a log in our own eye, like call out the mote in our neighbors? But that's what we do. We naturally do that. We judge others only when we start judging ourselves, meaning only when we go to war with all the passions that arise within us. So the claim here would be then to like drop that, which is maybe harder. To be able to accept what you are is much harder than demonizing it, arguably. Now, the fear is that this would just be easy. It would be like spiritually complacent. I'll just give up and do whatever I want to do. Try and see. It's not so easy. It's really not so easy to do what you actually want to do. A lot of things will come up. A lot of hang-ups will come up. So you could say the whole Kaula Marga and so much of the Kali Puja is just a systematic attempt to encounter hang-ups and to deconstruct them. So if I have a hang up around meat and fish, the purpose of Kali Puja is to bring meat and fish into the spiritual space until I realize they're as holy as everything else is holy. Until I realize my divinity is not in any way, shape, or form compromised by eating X and not eating Y. You know, spirituality is not about what you eat or what you don't eat. So what if you eat some onions or garlic? Will you automatically become spiritual just because you don't eat onions or garlic? Somebody said, oh, Vivekananda stopped eating fish. Ramakrishna said, so what if he did? Is that really renunciation? That's nothing. You give up Reese's for a week and you call that spirituality. It's like, maybe it's valuable for character development, but it's certainly not spirituality. What does spirituality have to do with what goes into your mouth? It's what comes out, arguably. And more importantly, is it really the case that fish is so powerful that onions and garlic are so powerful that they will somehow destroy God's expression through the body and mind? So the claim here is that if you have a problem with onions and garlic, if you have a problem with fish and meat and with wine, then what you should do in the name of this new form of spirituality and like kind of radically asserting immanence, you would bring them into the spiritual space. You would spiritualize them. You would consume them as sacrament. If you had a hang up with sexuality, and really who doesn't, then that must be spiritualized. That must be brought into the spiritual space. Like we were talking about earlier, there's so many different versions of this. Like entering into a sexual relationship with somebody that like you really didn't want to enter into a sexual relationship with, who was a different caste. You wouldn't want to look at them, let alone enter into a sexual like intimacy with them, you know? So that idea, or the idea of entering into a sexual relationship with someone outside of a marital structure, like that would be really problematic and transgressive. Or the idea of like entering into a sexual situation which wasn't about gratification, which was about veneration and worship and not about personal satisfaction or gratification. Like there's so many different ways to look at it, but a lot of it is just shock therapy, an attempt to dismantle our hang-ups in the name of expressing the free flow of mother's will in the universe. So the claim now is if you cut yourself off from the body, if you demonize it and step back from it, you cut yourself off from power. If you step back from the mind, if you demonize your thoughts and your intellect, which many yogic traditions do, because they're like, it's all about, you know, not thinking thoughts. If you do that, you'll cut yourself off from even more energy because the body and the mind are nothing but the same energy, Kundalini. And so stepping away from the serpent and calling it Satan is arguably a kind of schism. It's a rift that creates a desert, a wasteland out of spiritual life. And the role of Kali in the Tantrik world, the role of Mary, is to bring that life back, you know, to strengthen Christ's energetic body, so to speak, to give a body, in fact, to like give there for there to be a body. And I'm so happy Ruby is here now because just earlier I was just like citing you to the nth degree. I was like, Ruby's teaching me about the initiatic tradition of Mary, and then she was telling me this thing about the Ka body and Mary initiating Christ into the sadhanas, where he was able to strengthen his Ka. And like from that Egyptian point of view, that would be his etheric double, which he can then use to reincarnate and resurrect. And like that's exactly what we see with Ramakrishna, where like Vivekananda more specifically, where a lot of the energy that we feel from them is not from them by their own admission. It's like, so anyway, I'm just happy that you're here. And now, this idea of like the role of the divine feminine in the context of any tradition in which we encounter her, whether it's in the case of Christianity or uh, Indian Tantra or Buddhist Tantra or like and Dharma was teaching me a lot about the consorts of Guru Rinpoche and like what they represent within that particular transmissions. It's similarly a kind of return to embodiment, return to expression. Tarapit, as you know, is famous for its Vamachara practices, and like Vamakepa being the example par excellence of like drunk, like belligerent Bhairava, who's like representing the highest spirituality. But when you look at him, you're like, this is a dacoit. Like, look at this guy, like with his wild hair, shock of hair, and he's the kind of guy who like kills people. Somebody came up to him, asked for a cure, he went put, and the fucker died in front of him, and like and then probably like didn't even bat an eyelash, like drank from his skull bowl and give a fuck. Like Tarapit, Kamakya, even Kaligat. What to say of Kaligat? Like these are all places of Kali, and there you feel the presence of something really transgressive and evil, but not wholly unwholesome, bad, but not wholly unattractive, satanic, but not wholly irreligious. There's something about the vampire that is distinctly alluring for a particular kind of practitioner. And it's not just like nighttime, um, it's not just like social ostracization. It's that sensuality, and it's that sensuality in the context of some religious coding. So it's not that the vampire is a hedonist, and that's a very important point. The vampire isn't a hedonist, but the vampire is using, as it were, sensuality for some deeper interaction with prana, with energy. So I'm going to come to Dākinīs in just a moment here. But I would say, G, that it's not so much that Ramakrishna is a good boy, he just has better PR. Mama Kepa's PR was virtually non-existent, whereas Ramakrishna has very good PR. But Ramakrishna, he looks like a bad boy, but actually so he looks like a good boy, but he's actually a very bad girl. Anyway, so coming back to this, um, so we have the idea of the divine feminine here representing a return to the body, to sensuality, and that's arguably the language of like feeding the goddess of the senses. So if you eat chocolate cake, it is no longer seen as giving in to the indulgent body that takes you away from God, that wills against from God. It now the languaging is different. Now it's feeding the goddesses of the senses. Indriya Devi Alangrasa. So when you eat chocolate cake, really be there with the taste of the chocolate cake, and then let the goddess who is in the tongue enjoy the chocolate cake. It's an oblation. Whatever you do that is sensually delightful, that creates a sense of beauty, is spiritually valuable because spirituality is beauty. It's joy. It's meaning. And if something in your life is meaningful, even if it's chocolate cake, that thing is God. And you get this in the Upanishads. Honestly, the Taittiriya Upanishad, there's this idea of Mimamsa, and of course you can read it in many different ways. But the Ananda Mimamsa, or the analysis on bliss as presented by the Taittiriya Upanishad, will use the word Ananda for Vishaya Ananda, meaning for sense pleasures. It's still God, albeit the argument here is it's a somewhat more limited form of bliss, but it's bliss nonetheless. When you're tasting chocolate cake in the midst of an orgasm, what to say of an orgasm? What a profound moment. But anything that you can experience on the level of the body is an experience of Shakti, electricity. You're being electrically configured in a particular way. And sometimes something like an orgasm can be such a powerful configuration of electricity that it's more spiritually productive than a lifetime of celibacy. And that's what people were discovering when they entered into this context. Their hang-ups around what they thought spirituality was being confronted. And often what they discovered was power. Power from the body, power from the mind, power to be what they truly wanted to be. And once they were authentic in this way and no longer like hypocrites, like once they weren't feeling a sort of cognitive dissonance, weirdly enough, they had infinite energy because where all that energy was leaking was this cognitive dissonance of like their rules and their regulations and their hang-ups essentially about the world. Their notions of purity, if you will. So much of Kali Puja is an attempt to transgress notions of purity in the name of, and this is very important, not in the name of indulgence, that's fine too, but even that is a means to an end. It's in the name of Shakti, power. So there's still a kind of undercurrent, a goal in the tradition, which is taking you towards God, but God understood as life, as movement, as dynamism, as Shakti. So notice with the vampire, the myth of the vampire, and I was talking about the Mary licking the wounds of the Christ. So I can't help it. I'm like only thinking about that. But like the scene there is of receiving Shakti, of receiving the transmission through the sacrament. And like the crazy thing is, given all the vampirism talk that we're having, this is like one of the main practices of the Catholic tradition. That's why I'm kind of focusing my discussion on Catholicism, because its rituals very closely resemble the Tantric worldview. But like that's literally what you do every Sunday. Like you're literally vampires. You like go to the church. Like I do it in the smashan, and then everyone has a problem with it. Like oh my God, he's drinking blood. And like okay, look, I like sometimes I really feel like I don't have the stomach for the kinds of sadhanas that Mother Kali puts me through. Because like everybody wants to do Vamachara until your ritual partner is holding a beheaded goose flapping for its life over your mouth and its neck is squirting hot sticky blood and you're like drinking it and like then you're like this is disgusting. Or like when you collect it in your kapala and it doesn't look like a delicious red wine, it looks like muddy brown like toilet water. And you're like, bottoms up, I guess. Now it's time to drink this. Like it's ugh, it's awful, right? But like that practice of drinking blood, like that is either symbolically or literally done in the Catholic tradition. Of course, symbolically more so than often than not. And you drink the wine, and that wine is like, drink of this wine, it shall be like my blood, like this is my blood. And then of course eating the flesh, like that's another thing. As people come to Kali, they freak out. And I'm like, you guys, you're in a cannibal, like blood drinking vampire cult. Like, chill. It's just as scary. But now the idea of taking sacrament, like taking energy through blood, is so key. So what you're getting in that depiction of Mary, I think is so beautiful. It's like it's the actual sacrament. It's not like some symbolic wine or something that you're using to like represent. That's powerful too. The energy is transmitted through the prasad of the wine. That's wonderful. But this is different. This is like what you would call vampirism. It's like Mary is drinking the blood of her consort, and in drinking that blood, she's taking something. He's giving something, and she is giving like she's giving blood to him. So you can imagine the idea of like the consumption of menses. One of the most important things in the Kaula world is the reverence for menstrual blood and offering it to God. But that means consuming it as a sacrament. Like the consuming of menses is such an important thing. It's vice versa. And because the Shakti, you get Shakti from Shakti, and Shakti comes through Rakta, through blood. So that blood, the transmission of blood is at the heart of the vampiric myth because that's what they drink. They drink blood and they get power from the blood. And by drinking blood, they're accursed. Accursed in the sense that they don't fit into mainstream spirituality anymore. Accursed in the sense that they can no longer relate to anyone else in the world anymore. Accursed in the sense that they're doomed to roam the nighttime when the Vama Nadi is active because they don't want to like have to deal with the pressures of doing the things in the daytime that like the control-oriented right left brain demands of us. Like they are cursed in that they're spiritual, but they're spiritual in this way, I would argue. And so if you don't mind, just for Halloween, I thought it'd be fun to like unpack the mythos of the vampire a little bit and just see how like it just so beautifully one to one and arguably why we're so obsessed with it captures the movement that we see in the Tantric tradition where the Divine Mother Kali with all of her wild cremation ground blood drinking takes us back into the power of the body and the mind to conceive of divinity here and now within the context of this reality, not as abstracted away from it. It's an affirmation tradition, an acceptance tradition. And to step into it would naturally mean stepping away from all the modes of understanding spirituality that are prevalent in the marketplace of ideas, which would make a vampire out of all of us. Because in everyone's eyes, it would be like we are accursed. Right? Like, and that's the view of the Tantrika that we get from this particular tradition. They wander about skull bowl in hand, in the cremation ground by themselves, performing their rituals at night, worshipping their goddesses with wine and liquor and with various other transgressive substances. And they're free and embodied in this really powerful way that would not work in society, actually. The model that they're representing is a cremation ground jungle model. But what we're trying to articulate is so much crazier. The Kaulas, like the Kula practitioners, are wild and free and trying to express a life of like free of all hang-ups within the context of a really hung up world. And like that takes a whole different level of tact, which the great masters like Abhinavagupta and Jayaratta are interested in. Okay, so I want to leave you with the mantra. We talked about the ghosts and the jackals, and we talked about desire, divinize, all these things that make Kali Puja. But I can't let you go, I think, on a puja class night unless we like maybe just pass on one mantra. And this is a mantra for actually contacting Ma's Dākinīs or Yoginis, which I would argue is the heart of Kali Puja, at least in Kerala, at least in my upbringing. It's like that was our understanding of Kali Puja. You can't get to Kali unless you access her Dākinīs, her Yoginis, her attendants. And every person is a Dākinī in a sense, because every woman, and not just every woman, by woman I don't mean biologically determined, but every person is a Dākinī and that every person can be possessed by Dākinīs. But also remember, Dākinīs are a class of being. So understood one way, they like are astral beings. Yoginis and Dākinīs are a particular kind of energy, and they're more likely to be encountered in the cremation ground, although they could be there at crossroads also. And interestingly, when they are experienced, and then thus described by the people who have experienced them, Unanimously, they come off as vampires. They're almost always fanged. They're always wild-haired, usually naked, wild-haired, fanged, often drunk, and importantly, often depicted as being very thirsty for blood. Sometimes semen, sometimes menses, but often for blood. They really want to drink blood and sometimes eat flesh. But also, they come with their consorts. So in the mantra that I'm going to show you now, there's this line, swa swa bhartar samanvita, meaning each one has her own, like, slave boyfriend, I guess. Okay. Each one has her own consort, and she like comes with her consort, meaning she's coming in sexual union with her consort. But often, like that's not the depiction. The one that I'm going to present now has that depiction because it's in the context of Bhairavas and whatnot. But often they're like ekaviras, they're solo like women that just appear in the cremation ground, and you are their consort. Like they're looking for a consort, and God forbid you're not up to task because then they might freak the fuck out on you and tear you to shreds and like drink all your blood, and you won't be able to like actually handle that energy. It might drive you insane, etc. So all this like legend around the Dākinī that makes them very fearsome people to not people but creatures to encounter. So they're associated like some people say, oh, Dākinī. A Dākinī is a woman who this is a legend. A Dākinī is a woman who dies in childbirth, and now driven by anger for like the life she didn't live, she haunts the cremation ground and like hates everyone and wants to drink your blood. So like that myths like that when we were growing up, we would hear about Dākinīs. I had a caretaker one time. She didn't want me to go to a particular part of the house because I was very fond of like jumping the fence at night, going out. And there's like she was very like and it worked on me for a little while. She said, "Do you know in that place where you like to go?" Because I used to like to hop the fence and go up where there's like a little jungle at the top of my street. And my mom was terrified because there are jackals in there, and also there's these monitor lizards and snakes and things. But I really liked it because like as a child, what's better than a wild forest? And I like going there after sundown because then I'd be there. I could really just be by myself. I would go, and my caretaker at that time, she was an Indonesian woman actually, and she said to me very sweetly, she said, if you go in there, there's a Dākinī. And then she really described this Dākinī with her fangs. And you would think that that would give me more reason to go there, but give me a break. I was 7. I hadn't yet done my Kali sadhanas. And it worked. I was like, oh, fuck. I don't want to go in there anymore. There's a Dākinī in there. But the word that she used was Dākinī, I think. And the idea is that there's a scary woman in the Pontiana. Pontianak is another word for it. I think she used the word Pontiana, which means Dākinī, which is a vampiric, blood drinking, usually young looking woman who is actually like a crone hag kind of woman. Like, so something spiritual, like a fairy, like an earth spirit, that is very dangerous and both alluring and dangerous. So don't go there. And as a kid, prepubescent kid, like if you tell me there's a beautiful woman in the forest who's like waiting for me, like that's not gonna like I'm a child, so like that's not gonna work. Instead, she's gonna look beautiful and really scary. So the allure of the Dākinī is that she like it's like a siren kind of thing. So anyway, having said all of that, there's a lot of mythology around the Dākinī that presents her as something you should avoid. And naturally, because she's associated to cremation grounds, to transgression, to the kind of spirituality that would be taboo. So yeah, I'm still scared of Dākinīs. It's true. I'm terrified. Like you only know if you know Dākinīs, you should be scared of Dākinīs. The wildest power, the untrammeled and unpredictable power of the universe. What Bhairava can move without some level of trepidation around Dakinis. So this idea that they're like deeply, deeply associated to Mother Kali. They're like her attendants, her yoginis. And if you want to find Kali, you must go through her Dākinī. That's a central idea in the Kaula Marga. So a lot of this kind of developed from Yogini Puja or Dākinī Puja, where the goal was to contact Dākinis and from them get powers, siddhis and things like that. Maybe they met Kali through that. The early Shaivas like discovered Kali and then later theorized about her and developed entire philosophies around her. But maybe it all started with just some transgressive ritual in the cremation ground in which a Dākinī was encountered. And then that Dākinī was later able to convey to that practitioner the reality of Kali. So the Dākinis, nowhere I think in the tantric world is the myth of the vampire or the image of the vampire more prevalent than in the case of the Dakinis and the Dakas. And of course, in the case of Kali, who is Dakineshwari, who is the queen of all the Dakinis. She of course is the archetype for the Dakinis with her black skin, wild hair, naked, fangs, crazy, drunk, sensual, like that whole thing is in Kali, and naturally then it adheres in her Dakinis. So I'll take you to the mantra, one mantra, one such mantra for the Dakinis here. Let me just find it. It's not here. And the idea is if you chant this mantra, it invites them. That's the idea. So like, of course, to be used with care. And there's also a view that they won't come to the house. Like the best use of this mantra is during a new moon or during the waning moon. ideally in a cremation ground after 11 p.m. So that's kind of one idea around this mantra is that you should only contact Dakinis in the place that they like to go. But we found that no, they are willing to come anywhere. It's just that they prefer the cremation ground, but they're willing to come anywhere. Of course, the world is a cremation ground. Okay, we find it. So here's this mantra. It's a dhyanam. It's a meditation mantra. Oh, sorry, it's not even. Can I show you in Devanagari? Is that okay? Because I'm trying to find the transliterated version. Just don't know where it is though. Okay. Okay, I hope you don't mind. Let's just like look at it like in this version. I'll just show you Devanagari and then I'll put the if you don't mind, I'll put the transliteration later in the description of the video. So coming to my main Padati now. So, oh, where are we? Okay. So as you can see, here we go. In the Padati, and so it's page 83 of 118 for those of you who have this particular version of it. So in the Padati, it's called Pancha Dasha Yogini Puja. So Pancha being 5, Dasha being 10, Yogini being Dakinis. So Yogini or Dakini, and Pujanam. So this is the Panchadasha Yogini Pujanam. So it's the section is called the worship of the 15 yoginis. As we know, there are 15 yoginis with Mother Shodashi, representing the waxing moon, and there are 15 yoginis with Mother Kali, representing the waning moon. So look at what their dhyana mantra says. So dhyanam. Dhyanam means meditation, but also I'm going to say avahanam, invocation. So here's the meditation. Om Sarva Shyama Sikaraha Mundamala Vibhushitaha Tarjanim Vamahastena Dharayantya Suchishmitaha. So this idea of Digambara Hasan Mukhya Swaswa Bhartar Samanvitaha. So to translate, Om Sarva, they are all. So they are all Shyama, black. They're all black and they're holding asikara, holding swords. Mundamala vibhushitam, they're garlanded in skulls. And this is weird. Tarjanim vamahastena, their left hand is held out accusatorially. Arguably the most scary thing for a man is when his woman has his finger out like that. So like you could argue like it's a male projection maybe of like a woman accusing you, but like the Dakinis are upset and they like have a finger out like this, which is interesting. That's depicted in this dhyana mantra. So their left hand finger is sticking out, and then dhara yantya suchishmitaha, and they're smiling, they're sweet, their faces are smiling, but this connotes intoxication and kind of madness almost, and also a fondness for blood, which is not clearly depicted here in this particular mantra, but it's connoted. Then Digambara, they are naked, and Hasan Mukhya, again, Hasan Mukhya means they're smiling. Dharayantya Suchishmita, Hasan Mukhya, they're or intoxicated. And then we have Sva Sva Bhartar Samanvita, each one with her consort. And then a list of them are named. So this particular mantra, if you chant it, Om Sarva Shyama Sikaraha Mundamala Vibhushita, Tarjanim Vamahastena, Dharayantya Suchishmitaha, Digambara Hasan Mukhya, Sva Sva Bhartar Samanmitaha. It's an invocation, mantrically speaking, but you also, as you chant it, you should visualize the form of the Dakinis. And there are 15 of them. So you can just think of an archetypical Dakini who is Kali, and that will help. What you think about attracts that same thing. So if you think about Dakinis will come. But a few other things will also help. So they're very fond of liquor. So you can, oh, thank you. Viranatha has put the mantra in transliteration in the text, think in the chat. So if you're fond of liquor, if you're fond of I know. This was like yeah, okay, you get it. Because you've been in Tarapeeth, you know exactly the gravity of what we're doing. So Prabhu here, he just texted, and this is clearly a practitioner in the tradition. He's like, what the hell are you doing Dakini mantras from a scripture? Are you crazy? You're right. This is crazy. You don't even understand, like, from the point of view of the tradition, how crazy this would be. This is a really secret, really esoteric mantra because it summons powers that are often way too powerful for like most people to handle. And therefore, what I'm doing now is giving nuclear launch codes, as it were. But it's kind of hard to appreciate that point from outside the tradition, of course. So I do appreciate you saying that because yeah, like it helps us have reverence for what the fuck is going on here because this is like a diksha secret. We're about to learn the 15 yoginis, the names of the 15 yoginis, and here is a mantra that invites them, that invokes them, that helps you visualize them. It's really crazy, isn't it? Anyway, Mother Kali sometimes likes to give out AK-47s to toddlers, I suppose. I don't know. Because in my opinion, like what I've discovered is that they're all ma, everyone is ma. So what like she gets it. Like she knows what she's doing. Like all I have to do is do what she tells me to do and present all the things that I want to present, and then she'll make sure that the people who need to hear it will hear it, and the people who hear it who will probably not benefit from it will probably not hear it or like it won't stick. Like they're not. Look, here's what's gonna happen. Most people are not gonna do this mantra. I'm gonna put this mantra on the internet right now, and most people are not going to chant it or visualize it or like do any kind of thing which will actually productively create an outcome. And if some of them do, I don't know. The Dakinis themselves, I trust them. And even if that means they're gonna wreck your shit, like often what they'll do is convey power and knowledge. They have their ways. But anyway, um, coming now to the Dākinīs. Yes, it'll be great. It'll be wonderful. Just call in. I mean, like this is where I get canceled by the Indian Tantrik community, but like it'll be great. No problem. Just call in the Dākinīs. See what happens. No, I really trust the Dākinīs. I trust Dākinīs and I trust Yoginis. But I also trust that everyone who is here is the kind of person whom the Dākinīs will like. And so I'm just reacquainting old friends, if you don't mind. So now coming to the mantras. So here's a list of the names. Now, Dakinis are often fond of sexual fluids. They're fond of wine and whiskey and things like that. So these can all be libations, but typically I will offer flower petals, red flower petals one by one. So here are the mantras one by one. There are 15 mantras in all, and you worship 15 Dakinis. So Om, Ete Ganda Pushpe. These are all numbers, by the way. One, two, three. It's like sorry, Hrim. The mantra for it is Hrim. So here are the mantras for all the Dakinis. Like the first one would be Hrim ete ganda pushpe. And interestingly, the first Dakini is just Kali, the first of 15. Her name is Kali. Shri Kali Devyamba. Um, so we can do this a few different ways. Shri Devyamba means like the Devi Amba, the mother, the goddess. And look, hopefully this is your safeguard, by the way. When you call the Dakinis, you can call them as like there's one way to call them, which is to drag them by the hair and say, "Now kill my enemies." That's how most people do it, actually. They go to the cremation ground and they call the Dakini and they like try to trap the Dakini or something or like get her to do something for them, which I think is really horrible and really indicative of like the way that we treat women because the Dakinis are feminine spirits. And like with all things, with nature, we just want it to do what we want it to do. And we just want to drill and take all the oil whenever we want. And so we just want power and we're not willing to worship power, respect power, and be worthy of power. So here only a Bhairava can worship Dakinis. Only a Bhairava loves them. So here, what attitude are we taking? The attitude of a consort. Be careful. This is where I will warn you. Before you dance with Dakinis and try to be their consort, I urge some humility, especially for male-bodied practitioners. We just can't handle it. The nervous system might not be able to handle making love to a Dakini. It'll blow you out. So I have a hack, and this is what we learned from our teachers, is that you approach as a child. Batuka Bhairava is safe. So the way that a Dakini responds to you when she becomes your mother is unbelievable. It's like as a consort, she might expect certain things and might put you to a particular kind of test. But if you approach her as a mother, she's a feminine spirit. She can't deny she's from Kali, the mother of the entire universe. Like she just responds in a different way. So there's notice the mantras that we're giving now have a kind of insurance policy, but only if you understand it and use it. So Dev Yamba means, oh goddess, they're not used to being called goddesses sometimes. People don't really recognize them as goddesses. Sometimes a sex worker comes and she gets like treated very poorly because what she does is seen as being unholy. Now, the Dakini, who is also sometimes treated very poorly with a lot of scorn, it's like, oh my goddess, yeah, I love you. You're divine. You're the goddess. How will she feel when she's told that? She's happy because it's true. You see her in a very real way. Then, not only that, you're saying you're a goddess and you're my mother, oh goddess, oh Dakini Kali, here's some flower or something. Is that so beautiful? Here's a flower, here's some wine, etc. Yeah, baby girl deserves the best. That is our puja, what do you call it? Our puja ethos. Like baby girl deserves the best. And so worship her like actually worship her, actually do puja. It's so funny. People do puja for all sorts of things, but nobody wants to worship. Like, what if the Dakinis have nothing to give you? Why not just worship them for being Dakinis? Because they're beautiful and wild. Can't you love their beauty and their wildness and just worship that without needing anything in return? It's a rare person who can worship beauty without needing something in return. And that's the kind of person that will do Kali Puja ideally. So the mantras. Again, you can drop Ete Ganda Pushpe and it should all check out like as Dakini mantras. But I'm gonna add the Ete Ganda Pushpe. And Laleshwari, I looked over your document. It looks perfect to me. Like you have all the right cases for your Kadgamala Devis. So the cases look correct and the Namaha match the cases. And so Ete Ganda Pushpe is right in that particular case. So yeah, when I saw the document, it looked like kind of like this. Like the cases are all kind of like Namaha cases, where you have the Ye, the Bhagamalin Ye case, right? So the Namaha will agree with Bhagamalin Ye. And like it was fine. Like to me, all the Eteg and the Pushpa, it works. So from Ask Anand, of course, But what from my limited grammar understanding, when I looked over your Devanagari, it looked to me it checked out. Like everything agreed, I thought. And good work. That was very nicely done. Okay, so I'm just gonna read through these mantras if you don't mind, just blitz through them, and then we'll I don't know, stop. So Om Ethikanushpe Shri Kali Devyamba Shri Padukam Pūjayami namaha. I worship your holy feet. Pūjayami namaha. Salutations to you, O Shri Kali, you who are the divine mother. I worship your holy feet. Hrim eteganda pushpe Shri Kali Devyamba Pancha Shri Padukam Pūjayami namaha. Hrim eteganda pushpe Shri Kapalini Devyamba Shri Padukam Pūjayami namaha. Hrim eteganda pushpe Shri Kulla Devyamba Shri Padukam Pujami Namaha. Hrim Eteganda Pushpe Shri Kurukulla Devyamba Shri Padukam Pujayami Namaha. Hrim Eteganda Pushpe Shri Virodini Shri Padukam Pujayami Namaha. Hrim Eteganda Pushpe Shri Viprachitta Shri Devyamba Shri Padukam Pujayami Namaha. Hrim Eteganda Pushpe Ghana Devyamba Ugra first. Ugra Devyamba Shri Padukam Pujayami Tarpayami Namaha. Hrim Eteganda Pushpe Shri Ugra Prabha Devyamba Shri Padukam Pujayami Tarpayami Namah Swaha. So you get the point. So all of these are the names of the Kalis. You can just say all these mantras. And I like to add Tarpayami because I also often add some wine. So Tarpayami means libation. So Pujayami will go with the flower. Tarpayami will go with like a little wine libation, etc. So I think that's enough for now. We've talked about vampires, we've talked about the vampiric energy in context of Tantrik history, but also in terms of Christianity and Mary and Christ. And my favorite thing is talking about the Dākinīs. And now you can see there's a mantra for invoking them, for meditating upon them, and also for worshiping them. I highly encourage the worship of Dākinīs because they will empower you. When you worship them, and I mean really worship, like with a lot of love and devotion without needing anything in return, often when they love you, there's no end to what they do for you. Not that you want it, but they ensure that you're always enlivened, that there's always energy, that there's always knowledge, and more importantly, they bring you to Kali, you know? Right? So befriending all of this is, I think, the spirit of Halloween. Like right now, there are people probably getting ready to go out. Hopefully, that's going to be some of you in a little bit. We'll go out and like, and they're dressed in scary things, and they'll go out and they'll go to a nightclub and look around and see other people dressed in scary things, and they'll feel good about it. Isn't that wonderful? They feel good about being in a place where everyone looks scary. They themselves want to look scary. And that's because we're making friends, as it were. Making friends with all the things that scare us. Dakinis are scary. Why? Because they represent femininity, sensuality, power. And we're scared of our own power, our own sensuality, our own wild, untrammeled femininity. And now to make friends with all of that is the purpose of Kali Puja. Arguably, a man who does Kali Puja should be the kind of person who can hold space for women, meaning the kind of person who doesn't need to like tame women or control them or like take things from them. Only a Bhairava can worship a Dakini because she's the kind of woman that requires so much security in every sense of the word to be able to worship. And so there's a kind of political, kind of like gender politics angle here too that can be explored, which we won't explore right now. But from the mystical point of view, there are vampire spirits, as it were, not to say Vetalas, but there are Dākinīs and Yoginīs, and here's how you worship them. At least the Antariksha, the astral Dākinīs. And I don't even need to get into the whole Dākinī possession thing. There's a whole other like modality here where you worship a literal woman's body in whom the Dākinī is then called in. And then you worship the Dākinī through that woman. There's like a whole world around that. That's not in the Padathi. And here, all you're getting is 15 mantras with the 15 Dakinis with a simple flower offering. I think that's sufficient for contacting the Dakini. So anybody who's interested, like put that in your Kali Puja. This is a Kali Puja class, and like insofar as you're doing Kali Puja, add the Dakini Puja. It's part of the Avarana. It comes right after you worship maybe Kali, right before you worship Bhairava. Or some people worship Kali, then Bhairava, then the Avaranas. It's the first ring of Avaranas, meaning the 15 points of the 5 triangles correspond to the 15 Dakinis. I should have mentioned. So the worship of the yantra, once you worship Kali, you emanate outwards into the Dakinis or the Yoginis in the 15 points of the triangle. So it's so important in Kali Puja. And so I thought today for our Puja class, given it's Halloween, we just talk about vampires a little. So I hope you had fun. Jaima, Jaima. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Dākinī Devi Arpanam Astu Sarvabhyo Dākinibhyo Namaha Sarvebhyo Dākebhyo Namaha Sarvabhyo Yoginibhyo Namaha Yogeshwari Dākineshwariye Namaha Kalikaye Namaha Kali Arpanam Astu. Vagina.